G'day, May 40 here. So there's an essay that went viral on Compact magazine by Jacob Savage. So it's just his second essay at Compact, but the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, retweeted it. It's the dominant discussion on the right online this week. And his essay is called The Lost Generation, and it's all about how young white men have lost out, particularly since 2014, to all sorts of jobs and opportunities at elite institutions due to the turn towards DEI. So usually when you hear rhetoric about the beauties of diversity, it masks the downsides of diversity. So if you're pro-diversity, it means that you are anti-white. If you say, for example, we need more non-white men in the sciences, you're saying we need fewer white men in the sciences. If you're saying we got too many straight white Christian men in this area of society, you're saying actively that you want to discriminate against such men. And so pro-diversity functionally, effectively means anti-white. And so you take this beautiful sounding slogan, and it's beautiful in practice for some people, and it's terrible in practice for other people. So some parts of life are zero sum. If you want fewer white men in the sciences, in STEM, then that's bad for those white men. That's bad for their opportunities. And so here is the author, Jacob Savage, and he appears on a podcast hosted here by Isaac.
Yeah, no, I part of it is like how is this piece going to be attacked? Like, what is the main, I can't, I would love to say this, write the piece about all white American men, not just the leagues, but I don't have data for that, and that's not my experience. And but that would have been terrible. I'm so glad you didn't go into the spiel. No, it's like the thing is that you can't, you have to appeal, you have to anticipate, what the objections of your readership are going to be. And the truth is, I think I actually anticipated fairly accurately both what the leftist and the rightist objections would be.
What has been the leftist objections? I don't pay any attention. This is the blue sky objections.
Well, I mean, I think part of here's the thing. I stand by my conclusion. I really do. The truth is, I don't bear ill.
What is the conclusion?
The conclusion is we got fucked. I don't want to. This should not keep happening. I don't want trials and executions of people who got jobs instead of me. I think some of them actually are perfectly qualified to do it. That some people don't want to. Yeah, but
yeah,
to say
I didn't take any.
I think to tone down the anger element is very important in something like this, because you're just going to alienate people who are otherwise on the fence or sort of have seen it themselves to some degree or other.
Well, did you see one of the big critiques of I loved the end. I thought the end was fucking perfect. I thought it was exactly correct what you did in the end, and a lot of people took that as
no, it's
so we all naturally orient to what we do well. Right, I could be spending this time right now studying Torah or playing basketball or knitting or picking up trash to beautify my neighborhood. But instead, I choose to do a live stream on an uncomfortable topic because I feel like I do this well. And so in the job market, you want to ideally find a job that you do well, that is well paid, that keeps your interest, and where you can be around people that you like, where you can be around your tribe. And if you got any of those things going for you, right, this is a job that you likely want to hold on to. And if you got all of them going for you, then you should ask no other blessing in life. You have such a rich reward. Now, when you're losing at life, right, you don't get as much serotonin in your brain. You don't get those wonderful feel-good brain chemicals. And when I'm losing at life, I withdraw. I become more antisocial. I have less investment in the system. I become much more critical of other people and of myself. I am much more attuned to what's wrong with the world, which makes me even worse company, so other people want to withdraw from me. On the other hand, when life is going well, I want to expand. I want to reach out. I become more generous. I become more kind. I look for ways to help other people. My world expands So all these good things flow on top of each other. While when I lose at life, I retreat and become much more conspiratorial. You win at life, you're going to be much more invested in the system. And when you're losing at life, you're going to have less and less investment in the system.
It's like pussying out.
Yeah, they took it as you were pussying out. But I thought you were doing the opposite. No, I thought you were like, what's weird, creating this. You didn't tie it up, right? You didn't tie it up. You didn't say, and then.
So the interviewer here has such a strong personality, and Jacob, by comparison, seems so much more retiring.
And go vote for your local.
The problem with most conversations is exemplified here. In almost all conversations, we simply say what is expected of us. And Isaac is such a strong interviewer, such a strong personality, that he's dominating his interview subject, Jacob Savage.
Full congressman. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't give anybody any solution, which was great.
Here's the thing. I don't think there's an answer to what happened to us. Yeah, I don't think, like, it's, like, here's the thing. Like, most, like, elite white men are still basically fine. They did something else, like they didn't get to live there.
Well, crypto, as you mentioned, crypto.
Yeah, no, people find outlets. People are resourceful. Right. Some people like got completely screwed and like and it's horrible. But at the same time, you can't live the right. I live my life. My life is pretty good. Like I'm a ticket scalper. It's like an incredibly stupid way to make a living. And I do it. Like I don't have like. Not like rich, I'm not poor, I have a family who I love, and
I mean, you're doing pretty, right. From a very superficial standpoint, you're doing extremely well. Like you are, but at the same time, you were sold a bill of goods that was not real. Right? I mean, that's the thing.
I think that's like the real like rub of it for me is like, there were Jewish quotas in the 50s and a bunch of industries, which I'm sure some of your fans are very happy with, and whatever, fine. But like the point, like it's just like the truth.
So I think this is a highly dubious assertion, and I don't like the consumption of liquor during interviews. All right, I don't like alcohol. I'll admit it. It's a throwback to my Puritan Seventh-day Adventist upbringing. But this notion that they were sold a bill of goods, that if you were talented, you could expect to have a job writing for TV, that you could expect to have one of these elite jobs. All right, I think this is delusional. We're talking about a tiny number of jobs, even if there was no overt anti-white discrimination during this time. So nobody was sold a bill of goods that you could go out and get a job in TV. Right? This was always a highly dubious prospect, even on the best of occasions. Even if there was no anti-white discrimination, right? For every 1,000 men who could plausibly think that they had a reason to believe they could get a six-figure job writing in TV, in the best of occasions, only one out of those 1,000 could possibly get a job. So this idea that they were sold a bill of goods, that there were these elite jobs in media and in academia and in journalism that would go to the people with the most talent, I think this is highly dubious. Instead, I think what we're seeing here is the under-owner personality coming forward.
The truth is that some we call it's a feminist network.
Get off there now. Get off.
The truth is, like, if you know where you can go in life, like at the age of 20, you can make informed.
Yeah,
you can like informed. You can not informed.
No one could rationally know at age 20 that they were going to make a career in writing for TV, or even in academia, or in journalism. The structure just wasn't there, even if there was zero anti-white discrimination. So they were not sold a bill of goods. They had a fantasy about reality that was destroyed by reality. When your fantasy meets reality, reality is going to win every time, or you will lose.
Decision about your life.
Yes.
Like if I had known that being like a Jewish guy in Hollywood
would be the worst.
Would actually be bad.
Yeah.
In 2000,
you would have been able to make.
I would have been like, fuck it, YOLO. I'm going to go into crypto or tech.
Do you know this quiet thing they just did with?
So I just don't think that there's any basis of reality here. I think what you're seeing is the symptoms of under-owning. right? It's clinging to useless perspectives on life, right? Time and time again, I guarantee you, this man was given evidence that he was clinging to a useless perspective on his assurance that he could make it in writing for TV and earn 6 figures a year and support a family writing for TV. Again and again and again, he was provided evidence that he was clinging to a useless and evidence-free assertion about reality. But he chose to cling to a useless perspective on life. So there are structural anti-white forms of racism, as I'm sure there are structural anti-black and anti-brown and anti-women and anti-Asian forms of racism in various parts of society. Right? But I think what you're seeing here primarily is the symptom of clinging to useless perspectives on life against all evidence.
School loans? Yeah, but nobody knows this. There's this new law they just passed. It's called, I wish I could remember what it's called. It's called like the... I can't remember. But basically now there's an institutional way to say that your college misled you about opportunities. And you can get your loans discharged. Because it's true, they did mislead you.
The USC School of Social Work charges $250,000.
Now I'm put a gun to your head and force you to take out tens of thousands of dollars in student loans. So people who are so stupid to do this, I don't want to see them let off the hook. These guys want to play the victimhood card and say, let people off the hook for making these terrible decisions. They want to blame individuals' terrible decisions on universities. Right? I think individuals should take responsibility here for their own terrible decisions.
For an MSW degree?
Why should plumbers and manual laborers who didn't make these disastrous choices to take out useless college loans, why should they have to subsidize these losers? I don't agree with this.
Yeah, like at best you can make $60,000 rent.
And you guarantee those brochures said something.
And again, that's all boomer. It's all just like boomer.
Dude, I got lured into it by, I got lured into this at Tulane. I went to Tulane Law. They told me when I went to Tulane Law, this is a national.
You weren't lured in, bro. Jeffrey Epstein didn't diddle you. You were told what you wanted to believe, right? If you want to believe something, you will find someone to tell you that, right? You weren't lured. You weren't victimized by Tulane Law, right? You made, apparently, a bad decision, according to you. It's not Tulane Law's fault.
Program, you're going to be able to be placed in any city in America. We have amazing connections to.
Yeah, it's just so well known that Tulane Law School is the ticket to success in America. What is this guy smoking? He wants to blame Tulane Law School?
Give your loan.
No, I'm trying to get him forgiven. I'm not. I am very against. I'm very socialist. The two things I'm still super Marxist on is healthcare and student loans.
So why should people who work hard and make good decisions subsidize people who make terrible decisions? I would like to see public policy reoriented towards rewarding people who make good decisions and punishing people who make bad decisions, such as taking out ridiculous numbers of student loans.
Yeah, I'm very far left on both of those things.
Well, I think
student loans are the biggest crock of shit ever.
So this guy apparently favors the left when left-wing policies favor what he wants in life, and he favors the right when that is to his advantage. Right? Most of our politics are simply post hoc assertions. Right? We figure out what's best for us and for our tribe, and then we invent excuses for why it's really empirically, globally, cosmically, philosophically the best.
I think they should be completely abolished. Everybody should be forgiven immediately. Because it's not fair. You're talking about an 18-year-old kid. Give me a break. He wants to go and get something. He wants to educate and go bigger, and you're going to fucking indent him for life? No, it's ridiculous. And especially based on these fake promises, again, it's the same thing. It's like what you're.
Who's the you here? It's not the individual making these terrible decisions. It's these shadowy elites and institutions that the host Isaac here wants to blame for people like him making terrible decisions. While people who make good decisions and launch their efforts in a productive direction, they're supposed to subsidize these bad decisions. I don't hold by that.
Your article is saying is this bill of goods we've been sold that if you show up and you do all the right shit, you're going to be given a chance if you're good. That was not true.
When has that ever been true? This myth that everything's decided by merit. It's never existed, will never exist. This myth that if you just work hard, you'll do great in life is silly. Your efforts have to be aligned with what brings you a financial reward. If you're an employee, it doesn't matter how hard you work if your efforts aren't directed along the lines of what your employer wants. If you work for yourself and you work hard, but your efforts are not aligned with what the customer wants, you won't succeed. Hard work has never been a guarantee of anything.
No, I think, yeah, and I had a draft where I got more into this point, but I think that the difference, like, obviously this is happening with Gen Z as well. But the difference between us and Gen Z is, like, you're a white guy graduated college in 2020. You want to go work the New York Times. Like, that is your dream at your peril. Like, you have all the information. You know what I mean? Whereas I think we completely did not.
Even if there was zero anti-white discrimination at the New York Times, your prospects of working at the New York Times are very tiny, right? There's never a time when the hard worker was just guaranteed a job at the New York Times. This world never existed, and you were never sold this, right? You chose to believe useless beliefs that were continually invalidated by reality, but you chose to cling on to them. And this is on you. This is not on society.
Like, we graduated college thinking the world was like this, like, wide open.
Yeah, like 100%.
And
no one sold you this, right? This is your own delusional choice.
Yeah, it was not.
It was not really. Yeah.
And like,
did you know that many men tell women that they love them and they don't truly love them? They just want to have sex with them, right? So women who complain that men misled them into sex, all right? These guys are the equivalent of such women, right? Women lie to get what they want. Men lie to get what they want. Black people, white people, brown people, yellow people, Jews, Christians, non-Christians, Muslims, Shintoists. People are continually deceiving and manipulating and saying things that aren't true to try to achieve what they want.
People who got PhDs who, like, you know, in my case, you know.
Yeah, no, it was a completely crippling. I mean,
actual quotas would have been preferable. If in 2014 they'd just been like,
your own beliefs crippled you. It wasn't society primarily that crippled you. Your own choice to hold on to delusional, evidence invalidated beliefs crippled you. You crippled you.
10% in all of these industries, you would have been like, okay, this is the score. I know.
But it was worse. It was worse
because it was sort of like radicalizing it. Yeah. Because you could never get the right number of, like, tiny white men to, like, be in an industry.
Yeah.
Like, it was never the correct, and they make that point in the article, but it was never.
So when you lose at life, when you make terrible decisions, it's always easier to blame other people and blame society rather than take responsibility for your own terrible choices that were made flying in defiance of reality. So often you get negative feedback in life from employers, from bosses, from patrons, from customers, from your church, from your pastor, from your rabbi. Much of that time, that invalidating, negative, critical feedback is simply the voice of reality that you have been at war with for a long time.
You could never retire boomers fast enough.
Yeah.
To make
the numbers look good.
Right. You know? It's like, yeah, it's still 40% white male, which is more than their population.
Yeah, that's not fair. Okay, so what I have to ask you, obviously, is the cause. What caused this? Because I have my theory, of which you already know. But why did this fucking happen? Right? I mean, like, of course, there's always panics. There's always cultural panics. And, like, is this one that bad? Like, oh.
So let's reverse engineer the lost generation job crisis, right? Find work that gives you connection with people like you, right? Where you can be with your tribe as opposed to feeling like you're operating in enemy territory, right? Find work that stimulates you, where you're engaged versus being bored and stifled. Find work that aligns with your mission, right? As opposed to doing work that is demoralizing and cynical. Find work that you're good at, as opposed to work where you're incompetent and miscast, right? And find work where you are recognized for your efforts and you are paid for your efforts, right? If any one of these is missing, hard work easily becomes a trap. If all five are present, hard work, it becomes the most satisfying part of your life, or you have found the sweet spot.
All things considered, as you said, no, it's not that bad. it's not like people were being thrown in gulags, right? I mean, it wasn't that.
I understand it sucks,
But at the same time, what caused it? Why did this happen?
well, first, just in terms of that bad, like it was bad, but obviously there are things that have been worse, much worse,
for sure.
and like people are.
It's always easier to critique society, and I think this author, Jacob Savage, has many accurate critiques. But you could also make a critique of under-earning, of the bad choices made by his protagonists, such as time indifference, putting off what needs to be done, not using your time to support your vision and to further your goals, to deflect good ideas. If you just compulsively reject ideas that could expand your life and expand your income and expand your career and increase your profitability, you've got some kind of emotional addiction operating. You have some kind of compulsive need to prove, where you're just constantly driven to reprove your worth and value so that it leads you in a destructive path, right? That is not the fault of society. If you're clinging to useless ideas, useless beliefs, useless possessions, right, you're going to be held back. If you are oscillating between exertion and exhaustion, if you are habitually overworking, just working really hard, but in a poorly directed manner, right, you're highly likely to become exhausted, discouraged, then you'll underwork or just cease work completely. If you give away your time, if you just compulsively give for various causes, give away your services without charge, where there's no clear benefit to you and to what you believe in, you have something pathological going on. If you undervalue your own abilities and your own services, if you fear asking for increases in compensation for what the market will bear, right, you have some kind of under-earner mentality. If you isolate when you'd be better served having co-workers, associates, or employees, you've got something pathological. If out of the fear of being larger exposed, you experience all these physical ailments, if you lose at life and then you just feel your body giving out on you, all right, there may be something pathological in the way that your brain chemicals are being provoked. If you are burdened by misplaced guilt and shame, when you feel uneasy when asking for what you deserve, right, what you are rightly owed, right, there's something going on inside of you. If you're not following up on opportunities, leads, jobs that could be profitable, if you're beginning all sorts of projects and tasks but do not complete them, you have some under-earner mentality. If you are just bored with stability, if you're creating unnecessary conflicts with coworkers, supervisors, clients, right, if you're continually generating problems that result in financial distress, that is not primarily society's fault.
Are alive, they're living their lives. Most of, part of growing up is realizing you don't achieve your dreams ever. But I think what in terms of,
I'm not trying to minimize, but I really am not. I'm just saying it's like, it's not like there wasn't like, of all the sort of like crazed political witch hunts of history, like at least people weren't actually being like physically fucking harmed, right? And, we could get there, but we're not there yet.
I think part of what caused it was Obama was elected.
So
I think that I know I'm not. I blame Obama, some of the Obama directives to colleges and stuff, but I think that sort of from a more macro cultural perspective, people thought we were about to enter a post-racial era, and then
all right, only idiots thought we were entering a post-racial era. There will never be a time when your ancestry, when your tribe, when your race is irrelevant, right? This is a belief that has no basis in reality, never did, and anyone thought that the Obama era was going to usher in a post-racial era was completely delusional.
What you had was much better. I'm very glad you didn't put that in. Sometimes you lose. What does that mean?
I think the idea. I think what I'll tell my kids is like, you have to tell your kids to do what they want.
Losing carries a stench, right? People will back away from you when you lose. Your voice gives you away. How you carry yourself gives you away. People feel much more comfortable hanging around with winners, and people naturally tend to distance themselves from losers, which makes losing that much more easier for losers.
Like I don't know, with stupid libs.
Knowing your kids, I feel like they're going to be completely fine. No, I don't want to. They're such like total forces of nature that they're just going to let you know it's going to be fine. Like, I'm really not worried about your kids. I'm like, oh, good.
Well, you can look at someone, oh, there's a force of nature. We don't have to worry about them. But no matter who the person is or who the child is, there will be situations where they're likely to thrive, and there will be situations where they're going to struggle, right? These kids, not these particular, I don't want to talk about any one particular kids, but all of us, right, are going to be confronted by situations that we are not well suited for. And the more time we spend in situations where we are ill-suited, the more likely we are to approach disaster, right? Nobody is such a force of nature that they become immune to the power of the situation.
But like, yeah.
No, but I also like separately, like, I do think like having kids is like radicalizing in a way where you're like, you know, it's like one thing if this happened to me, like the idea that this could possibly happen to my kids is like so insane.
But it's not that. It's not that insane. Right?
No. It's not insane.
It's not like they're being like. Again, that's what I'm saying. It's more about the bait and switch. It's about the bait and switch. That's the fucking. The problem is not the quality of it.
Sure, I tell.
The bait they are talking about here was the bait that was in their own head that they wanted to hold on to. It's like saying that beautiful woman who walked down the street looking amazing, that was the bait that was put there before you. And then it's frustrating if she turns you down when you ask her out. Well, if she's way out of your league, right, you are delusional to ask her out.
The problem is the bait and switch.
I tell my wife, like, they become an HVAC repairman.
Right.
It's so much easier to play the victim, to feel victimized, and it's normal, natural, and even healthy at times when you're dealing with an unexpected loss. There's a time and a place to embrace feeling the victim. But that time period should be limited.
Like we should pillage the nest fund.
Right.
Go do some like.
Well, and that's why that drives people so crazy, because it's not. We have been told that we live in a certain place, and then that place was not real, right? And that's fucked up. You know, that is real.
Who told you this, right? You are selecting voices that tell you things that resonate with voices in your own head. Voices continually saying things that are frequently invalidated by reality.
Really fucked, because as you just said, if you could have made much better decisions in your life if you'd known.
Right. Every normal woman can give you countless examples where men have been pigs and treated her badly. Every man can give you examples where women have mistreated them. I'm sure many black people can give you examples where white people are horrible to them, and white people can give you examples where black people are horrible to them, and Christians can give examples where Jews were bad, and Jews can give you examples where Christians and Muslims were bad. No matter your identity, you can always find voluminous reasons for why your group has been intensely victimized.
There was a 10% quota, like, right? If that had simply been transparent to you, you know?
Yeah.
And you had to deal with, and I had to deal with.
Am I the only one who finds this part of the discussion incredibly childish? If only this had been revealed.
Decades of frustration, because we had been told one thing and the other thing was reality. You know, and that's fucked up. We all had to spend a decade languishing in shit, right? You know?
No one had to spend a decade languishing in feces. You chose to spend a decade languishing in feces because you denied reality 3 times before the cock crowed each day.
Basically, like, yeah, we didn't have the opportunity to say, like, okay, there's a quota.
You had opportunities that billions of other people didn't have, but you had fewer opportunities that some people in your position did have 20 years before you. All right, the world is kind to us, disproportionately kind to us, and at times, and do we feel gratitude for that, or do we only focus on where we get the short end of the stick?
We're gonna go around,
right? If they just transparent, you're right.
But the truth is, like, and I do blame myself, because like they told in most ways they told us, like they didn't tell us, like
who told Jacob Savage you are on a path to a 6-figure TV writer job and you can feel confident in that? I'm pretty sure nobody told him that
explicitly.
No, they didn't tell me, man.
No, but like you like got the sense, like,
no. That's why your article is so powerful, because people like me didn't really think about it until I didn't really start.
People don't like to think about their limitations. People don't like to think about painful reality. That's not necessarily the system's fault.
been talking to you about this. And then I started being like, oh shit, I got fucked by this. I got fucked really bad.
Yeah, and how many people did you F, right? I know I have often F'd people, right? I have often been the victimizer. I have often been the bad guy. I have often been the person who's brought down the mood of other people. I've often been the person who has reduced the quality of work or the quality of life, right? I have made mistakes, and at times then I have been victimized. So it's easy to find examples of where forces outside of yourself have effed you over. Right? Much more painful to face up to those times when you've effed other people over.
I did everything I was supposed to do, just like you, right? I fucking killed it in law school. I was at the top. I passed the bar. I did every single fucking thing I was supposed to do. And I still got fucked, right? So, like, that's the, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm sure he can find 100 reasons and 100 examples of why he was screwed over. And if he thinks more deeply about it, he can find 100 examples of where he screwed other people over. And he should be able to find hundreds of examples of where he should have tremendous gratitude. So this sense of victimhood and resentment and anger, it's not a productive way to go through life, as opposed to aligning yourself with times when you have been treated more kindly and more generously than you deserved, where other people have loved you. Right? Reflect on that will be usually a healthier foundation for living.
The fucking bottom line, right?
It's tough. It's tough to think about like what would have been like if you had been born in 19.
So plying people with liquor and getting them to be vulnerable makes for a compelling live stream. It's also a really dangerous thing to do to people. It's a dangerous thing to do to yourself and to those affected by you. It's a dangerous thing to do to your guests and those who are affected by him. I just think it's incredibly ill-advised to talk about highly combustible, controversial, and uncomfortable topics while plying people with liquor. I think this is just terrible.
55, on so many different levels. Like,
So what you really want is to be a screenwriter.
I mean, like at this point, and I think since my critics are fair in saying this, like it's dying, like there's nothing for anyone. But I mean, part of why it's dying is like they didn't make shift.
I remember in 2007, I think there was a Hollywood writers' strike, and I went to a picket line, and I was awkwardly trying to move towards that question. Isn't your livelihood just highly dubious to begin with? And the TV writer that I was interviewing, he got there quicker. He said, what you're essentially asking me is, aren't we just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic? And that is what's happening in the TV writing industry overwhelmingly. It's just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It's not primarily the fault of anti-white racism.
For 10 years that like appealed to most people. But that's what I wanted. That's what I remember I was the editor of this like stupid Ivy League gossip blog, kind of like a Gawker Junior in like 2008. And I thought at the time, like, oh man, these, I don't want to be writing about the people like doing things. I want to be just like the guy making the movie or making the TV show. And
yeah, when you're winning at a status game, you don't want to think of it as a status game. You just want to think it's a meritocratic reward for your efforts. If you're losing at the status game, then you're heavily incentivized to talk about what a stupid status game we've got going here. So this is a powerful essay. Strongly recommend it. For all my criticisms of the author of the essay, strongly recommend it. It provoked all sorts of thoughtful live streams. Here's a bloke, Nick Fuentes, served in the armed forces, apparently overseas, did a video, DEI in the last generation of young white men. And again, I'm not arguing that there's no group that cannot make a substantial case for their own victimhood, whether white men, black men, Latino men, Asian men. Every group can find plentiful reasons for why they've been victimized.
Speaking of another industry that was just consumed with DEI, when I became the chair of the subcommittee on higher education, the Virginia House of Delegates, the first thing the head of Chev wanted to talk to me about, which Chev is like our organization, which kind of covers all of it, was their commitment to equity. And I remember looking at him and going, tell me what you mean. Right? There was this idea. And look, I'm not saying...
So a commitment to equity in practice means anti-white discrimination. And you can make a case for discriminating against white people, right? But pro-diversity, equity, inclusion in practical effect means anti-white.
He was a bad guy. I'm just saying that it was fascinating to me that there was this automatic assumption. I had been put as the chair of the subcommittee to send higher ed a message that we were kind of pissed. And yet the first thing in there is, Nick, we just want you to, Delegate Freitas, we just want you to understand we are absolutely committed to equity. What do you mean by that? And it was interesting because it was this long conversation about disparity. And as he's explaining the equity process, I looked at him, I said, so let me see if I understand this correctly. My daughter, who's about to graduate high school, is a white woman. Are you...
So the more intense your in-group identity, the more likely you are to talk about how much you hate out-groups, right? If you've got an intense white identity, you're much more likely to talk about how you hate non-whites. If you've got an intense black or Asian or Latino identity, you're more likely to talk about your negative feelings and resentments towards the white power structure.
Telling me that she is going to have a harder time getting into college because her mother and I are both white, because we stayed together and didn't get a divorce, because we didn't beat or abuse her, because we worked hard our entire lives to reach a certain income bracket where we're not wealthy, but by the same token, we're not impoverished. So essentially, because her mother and I worked incredibly...
So here's my big problem with promotion of DEI when it comes at the expense of excellence, right? It doesn't incentivize people to pursue excellence as much as they should. Now, there are many examples of where diversity has improved the quality of perhaps restaurants and sports and maybe more diverse teams in certain settings. They make better decisions, right? I'm completely open to there are many obvious benefits to diversity, and there are also costs, right? If you have less social cohesion, less social trust, people will work together less efficiently. On the other hand, getting those diverse perspectives, right, may make the team more effective.
Hard to provide her.
Right. I want to go where the evidence leads. I want excellence. I want social cohesion. I want social trust. I want a higher quality of life. And whatever leads to those things, I support.
With a good childhood and good opportunities, she will now be disadvantaged when it comes to admissions. Is that your concept of equity? Well, no. Okay, but is that the practical effect of what will happen when she applies?
Perverse incentives.
I said, so essentially what you're telling me is I should go tell my wife right now we're getting a divorce so that she can go up in the admissions calculation. Well, all we're trying to do is we're trying to give students that when...
So we reduce the incentives for excellence, when we reduce the rewards for doing the right thing, when we increase the rewards for doing the wrong thing, we get less excellence. So I am hostile to a push for diversity, equity, inclusion when it reduces quality, when it gives reasons for people to have less and less trust in each other and in our institutions. So some parts of America where you have the most push for diversity, equity, inclusion, you have lower quality product. Go to the post office, go to the DMV. There's been a decline in the quality of TV writing and movie writing and novels over the past 10 years. So sometimes I'm sure diversity improves quality. Other times it reduces quality, right? So during the big push since 2012 for more diversity, equity, and inclusion, you have more and more people who are hiring, and they just took it for granted that they were no longer going to hire the best people, right? They were taking it for granted that they would have to exclude white guys. So diversity is not just being a tiebreaker. It's often being the primary driver in hiring. Qualified candidates have consistently been passed over solely due to them being white. We have a shift in institutional focus from quality to achievement to something else, right? Instead of breaking news as a journalist and providing more thoughtful background on what's going on around you, right? Journalism has often degraded into political activism. Many institutions have been promoting optics over data and excellence. And so much of the reason Americans have lost trust in our institutions is that our institutions are less effective. And part of the reason that our institutions are less effective is when diversity, equity, inclusion has been pushed at the price of excellence.
Want to traditionally have the same advantages. I get that. I get that. I'm even sympathetic to this idea that people, through no fault of their own, who were put in bad conditions, have an opportunity to be able to attend college. I'm sympathetic to that. The problem is you are creating a perverse incentive structure. You are not just providing opportunities to people that we could all be sympathetic with. You are creating conditions whereby we grade who gets opportunities, and you're disadvantaging people, and you are telling parents and students that the less they achieve, that the more chaos reigned within their households, or the less white they can be on their entrance exams, the greater their probability of admission. You're doing this in the name of equity? What do you think you're going to achieve through this? And it was almost like, well, there's just no way around it. We have to do it. Well, I can tell you those bills died in my committee, but
they're going to pass now.
But they're going to pass now.
This is the last part of this segment about media, this Andrew story here, and I'll reveal what happened to him.
So this essay in Compact Magazine, The Lost Generation by Jacob Savage, it focuses just on three industries: the media industry, the journalism industry, and the academia industry. And so if we try to aggregate the total number of lost positions due to this anti-white discrimination, we're talking about approximately 2,000 jobs a year. So over the course of the Lost Generation decade, we're talking about 20,000 at most career-defining jobs that would likely have gone to white men under the hiring standards pre-2012. So even without this type of racial discrimination, at best, out of every 1,000 aspirants to these dream jobs, only one person in 1,000 will ever get them. Right? There's no strong reason to believe that once you graduate from college that you have a better than even chance of working in TV, writing for TV. So I asked Gemini, where has diversity made things better? I think about the Premier League, the top soccer league in the world, and the intensity and the quality of play has dramatically increased as the Premier League has become more black and more diverse. Now, I hear all the time that more immigration leads to higher quality restaurants. I'm not a foodie, but I'm willing to accept that that's true. So I asked Gemini, where else has diversity improved the quality? And so it says science and academic research, right? Papers written by more diverse groups receive more citations than those written by homogeneous teams. And in tech, the work product of more diverse teams is apparently better than more homogeneous teams. And in corporate strategy, there's a McKinsey Diversity Matters series that finds that more diverse companies are more likely to be profitable. And Gemini says that some of the work product of a more diverse medical team is likely to have better outcomes, and a more diverse storytelling team produces better quality stories. Okay, so those are the arguments that Gemini gave me, and I pushed back. Well, wait, wasn't that McKinsey study on diversity debunked? Yes, it was. Gemini admits that it was debunked. So one of the key arguments that Gemini was trying to offer me about how diversity produces better business outcomes didn't pass replication. So I asked them about, what about all the other studies that shows that diversity improves the bottom line, improves excellence? All right, are they equally dubious? And Gemini says, yes, safe to assume that most of the specific diversity equals better outcome studies are facing the same crisis of replication, methodological scrutiny as the McKinsey study. So all the studies that Gemini was citing to me to show that diversity makes work product better, they're all highly dubious. So why do you need to rely on dubious studies? Don't you have something better going on?
Where were you? Where have you been? I've been waiting on you. And since that moment that God had that conversation with me, I've been in such a better space Because now it's just, I'm thinking about, is God pleased with this? Not if the bullies and uglies are pleased, but if God is pleased. And when you have that personal relationship with God, guess what? Even in school, he's there. Wherever you are and whenever you need it, you have something that you can tap into immediately. It's immediate. You don't have to leave a message. He's not going to call you back. He's there immediately. Soon as you call on him, on the first ring, he's going to answer. And I want you guys to remember that. You're young, and first of all, I want to say, I'm proud of you guys. This is a major... To be so young, for you guys that are in college, to be so young and to care this much, this early in your life, it tells us how smart you are, and it tells us that there's hope for our future. So God bless you. Congratulations, you guys. You're amazing. Congratulations. You guys are amazing, okay? Know it. Feel it. Yes. Yes. Proudly. Be it proudly. Be who you are proudly.
Amen.
Yes.
So what have you, I mean, you're an amazing mother. What have you seen that has been a struggle for young women today? And then also, since both of us have little boys, I would love for you to also talk about the male side of that question as well.
So conservative culture became more dominant in 2024 prior to Donald Trump's election. Ezra Klein's got an article in the New York Times today saying that the Trump vibe shift has gone in the opposite direction. There's no longer a Trump vibe shift. I'm not so sure. I am surprised how much the Overton window has expanded. One example is how freely and openly Gemini, chatbot, and ChatGPT are willing to engage with ideas that were considered outside of the Overton window, right? Gemini will engage with the ideas of Charles Murray or Steve Saylor or Christopher Caldwell, and won't rely on calling these people, bad names. It will just engage straightforward with an essay by Yggdrasil, right, a nationalist thinker who was a voluminous writer in the late 1990s, and Gemini has no problem taking up these dissident nationalist challenges.
It was absolutely deliberate, and again, there's going to be people that say, oh, poor, because this is always the response that you get, especially from
poor fragile white males,
especially from liberal women, and
it's a very dangerous thing to confess vulnerability, and you can be hurt by it, right? People will often use it against you. People will put you down. It's takes very good judgment to recognize when you're in a situation where it's appropriate to be vulnerable.
And arguably, especially from liberal white women, when he talks about that whole snapping and the clapping back.
I know exactly what he's speaking about.
And the bird hand and the whole deal. It was... It really was. Everybody was celebrating the demise of white men, not because of something that they had done wrong as individuals, but just as a category. In fact, there was an interesting case of a popular YouTube channel.
We all tend to essentialize outgroups, right? This isn't just something unique, some blind form of bigotry against white men, right? If you're a Christian, you'll tend to essentialize Jews, atheists, Muslims, Baha'i. If you're Muslim, you'll tend to essentialize Jews and Christians and other non-believers in Allah.
Who was a liberal woman named Shuan Head. And she had a very popular channel, very good channel. And she had the audacity to ask the question, like, are men okay? Like, is there something going on right now? And her viewership, her audience turned on her on a dime. It was the absolute celebration of the collapse of young male morale. Like the more miserable they were, the more liberal women celebrated it.
They would even do it in being a mother. Do you remember the video of the mom who was explaining to her two little boys, they were little boys,
Little white boys.
all of these bad things that white men have done to women and how women have had it so hard, and that white men have basically been just horrible to women. And anyway, she just totally explains all this stuff from that lens to her little boys. And the response was the boys were like basically realizing that, oh, boys are bad and I'm going to go hide now.
Yeah. That was like literally she was talking about the
like
reason
they were
why,
like 4, 5, 6 years old.
the reason why Kamala Harris.
I'm sure many Muslims after the Bondi massacre very tempted to non-Muslims to say, oh, Islam's bad, Muslims are bad, right? Really bad thing to say in public, to just generalize about a billion people that way, and equally bad to just say men are bad or white people are bad or Christians are bad.
Just lost, and the boys are like, well, because people are afraid to vote for a woman. And then she's going through and she's and who's been responsible for this? And it's men. What kind of men? Like, and literally one of the boys goes, I'm going to go hide now. It's just,
yeah.
And you're sitting here wondering, the big thing I'm looking at is like, first of all, where's the father in this?
So many academics publish dozens, even hundreds of papers. And then there is a thoughtful economist named Ronald Coase who lived to 101. And his reputation, he's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, rests primarily on just two papers: The Nature of the Firm, published in 1937, and The Problem of Social Cost in 1960. He's the father of the entire field of law and economics. And he asks a very simple question: if markets are so efficient at allocating resources, why do we need companies at all? Why do we need a firm? Why doesn't everyone just act as an independent contractor? And he comes up with the answer: firms exist to reduce transaction costs, the cost of finding partners, negotiating contracts, enforcing things. It's much more efficient to have a firm. The more employees you have in a firm, right, the more rules you need to have. So you work for a sole employer and you're the sole employee, you can have a lot more freedom than if you work for a firm that has 10,000 employees. But there are many resources that come for working for a larger firm as opposed to just one person. Then he also published The Problem of Social Cost, where it says if transaction costs are zero, people can bargain to efficient outcomes, regardless of who holds the property rights. So he said, if you torture the data long enough, it will confess, right? You can manipulate statistics to tell you anything that you want.
Well, first of all, I'm just glad that woman gave those boys a chance to live and didn't abort them first.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of your first hurdle. They made it through.
This
they
is
made
cruel
it through
and
that.
sadistic, is what this is.
Yeah, they made it through that. So let's go ahead and make them feel like the most scuzzy people in the world. Like, way to go, Mom.
When there's this one famous tweet that was going around where a woman goes, "Oh, I'm pregnant. I'm off to the doctors right now to find out if it's a girl or an abortion," and people cheering this, and it's like,
I mean, this article is about what happened, or what has happened and continues to happen to.
I'm not the biggest anti-abortion activist, but when I hear women throwing parties, right? A woman I knew threw a party after she had an abortion. It feels wrong.
Millennial men, millennial white men.
Yeah.
For Zoomer white men, their entire lives have been this.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't graduate from college or university and then enter the workforce and then get the door slammed in their face. Like in the case of Ethan here, he applied for other. By the way, just some more stats here. 64 tenure track assistant professors at UC Irvine in the humanities and social sciences have been hired since 2020. 3 of them have been white men, 4.7%. At UC Santa Cruz, 59 tenure track hires for arts, humanities, and social sciences. 2 of them are white men. 3%. Remember, they're a third of the entire population, and they're getting 3% of the job offers at elite institutions within the University of California system. Not that UC Santa Cruz is elite, but Berkeley is, and Brown certainly is.
Let's go down a little bit. There's another part here that I think is interesting.
Yeah, this is the end of.
So the social construction of reality is a domain of the academic world that seems to be dominated by the left. That doesn't mean there isn't profound insight to be found there. And so much of reality is socially constructed. So I noticed when one person in a church would get a divorce, a divorce would tend to ripple through other couples in the same church. When one couple in a synagogue gets divorced, right? Divorce tends to ripple through the synagogue. If your friends are having affairs, right, you are much more likely to have affairs. If your friends are gambling serious amounts of money, you are much more likely to gamble serious amounts of money. And when I got sick in February of 1988, and I was basically bedridden for the next 6 years with chronic fatigue syndrome, it was incredibly painful to me how the overwhelming majority of people I knew my age wanted to distance themselves from me. And this is a very painful part of reality. We all tend to want to distance ourselves from people who are sick and people who are losing at life because it feels contagious. So unless you have very deep, thick ties with someone, such as family, right, you're very likely to withdraw from them when they start losing at life. Because people, when they start losing at life, they become less pleasant company, they become darker, they become more dismal, they become more conspiratorial. While when you attach yourself to winners, right, they tend to bring out the best in you. So I don't like cutting people off. I do it in the rarest of circumstances, but I do notice you can dial people up or down in your life. Just change the proximity, the intensity, the duration, and the frequency of your interactions, right? Modulate rather than amputate. So you're going to be affected if your friends and the people closest to you are consistently losing at life, and you will naturally want to distance yourself because everything tends to spiral. Winning spirals into more winning, losing spirals into more losing. One sin leads to another. One good deed leads to another, right? So you can move your interactions with people from in-person to the phone, right? From the phone to a text message. You can reduce the intensity of the interaction. You can reduce the length of the interaction. You can reduce the frequency of the interaction, right? Winners tend to believe that they have more control over the outcomes in their life, more of an internal locus of control than is probably factually correct. Losers tend to feel that outside forces are acting upon them and they have less locus of control. So when you dial down the losers, you preserve the bandwidth required to keep up with the winners, who will generally demand a higher level of engagement, optimism, and competence from you.
Ethan's story here, where he applied to be a tenure track position 5 times. He was flown out again and again for interviews and meet and greets, and went on to say, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. At a certain point, he began to see himself in the same way that the search committees did. Other identifiers or other things I valued about myself have receded, he explained. Being a white man, meanwhile, moved into the foreground in a way I didn't expect. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you, as a younger millennial, one of the youngest millennials, I get this on almost like a spiritual level. Mm. Not living your life thinking I am this identity characteristic. I am John, or I am Ethan, or I am Christian. Yeah. I am an individual. That's just naturally how a lot of us think. It goes back to Carl Benjamin's quote about liberalism is Sharia law for the English. Like I just lived my life thinking that way. Yeah. And then to have somebody come along, and I remember the first time this ever happened to me, I was in college because I'm about 10 years younger than these guys. I remember the first time I got into an argument in college and somebody dismissed my argument because I was a white man. Yeah. And I didn't even know how to respond. Like the conversation just ended there because I was confused. I was totally.
We're evolved to think this way. We're evolved to think tribally. We're evolved to side with those perspectives on life that benefit our tribe, and we're evolved to dismiss the perspectives of out tribes.
Like, have you ever been in a debate with somebody, and then you're so blindsided by what they say, you're rendered speechless?
Well, it's interesting because here's what I found. When somebody presents a response to a well-reasoned argument that is so absurd, they're actually some of the most difficult to respond to because you haven't been prepared for it. You've been prepared to respond to arguments that are about competing evidence or lines of logic or reasoning. And so what you're expecting with an empirical argument is to someone to counter with an empirical argument. When you respond with a logical argument, you're expecting...
Right. This guy has way too high expectations for argument and discussion. And unless you essentially share a hero system to begin with, right, there's not a lot of point in having arguments, right, because you don't share a hero system. What's more fruitful is to share observations of reality. So the essay that's getting all the attention this week is called The Lost Generation. It's by Jacob Savage, and essentially about a cohort of citizens without a country, right? They're genetically tied to the American nation of 1787, but they feel bureaucratically managed by the civil rights state of 1964. So their despair comes from the friction of being ground down between these two incompatible constitutions. So the Lost Generation, when they voted for Trump, they thought they were voting for a counter-revolution, but they got a presidency that is constrained by the very rival constitution that mandates the obsolescence of young white men. So the lost generation of young white men remains lost because the legal architecture that displaced them is still the supreme law of the land. And that's the insight, one of the powerful insights that you get from Christopher Caldwell's book, The Age of Entitlement.
And someone to respond with an illogical argument. You're expecting them to demonstrate to you why your data is flawed or why your conclusion doesn't follow or why there's some sort of there's something wrong with either the structure of your argument or the data that you're using to present. But when they can look at you with absolute intellectual conviction and just say, well, of course you'd say that, you're a white man.
Well, that's because
it's almost like, well, okay, I am a white man. Like, that's a statement of fact. But what am I supposed to do when you can discount all of my evidence, all of my reasoning based off of the color of my skin?
So where do you go to have sovereignty in that situation, right? If you are losing in the modern knowledge economy, right, the physical world and the religious world and the spiritual world and the tribal world, these are all worlds that offer an escape from what you can label as the fake world of emails and Slack messages and HR policies, right? You can regard the body or the church or the synagogue, all right, your tribe, you can find there the lost sovereign territory. So once a man has tasted this Vitalist red pill, right, once he views the current order not just as unfair, but as physiologically repulsive, he's unlikely to go back to being a compliant middle manager, right? He becomes a waiter for the apocalypse, right? He waits for the shock event, the economic collapse, the war, the political constitutional crisis that creates an opening where his tribe can resume what it believes is its rightful place, where his specific skill set of force, endurance, will, right, becomes more valuable than the skill set of the current elite, which he can put down for just being all about compliance, consensus, and procedure. So if business and entertainment and journalism and the academy are not places where you can exercise your sovereignty, right, maybe the body and the tribe and the church can become, right, your refuge where you can exercise some sovereignty.
I was taught my entire life that was wrong. Don't do that. It's inappropriate. It's racist. And now I'm being told, no. It's racist if you do it. It's perfectly justifiable if everyone does it to you.
Well, and logic and facts and all of that type of like scientific method, all of that, those are things that the patriarchy,
those are attributes of whiteness. And
so Irving Kristol, the godfather of neoconservatism, had a popular phrase: a neoconservative is a liberal who has been mugged by reality. And if you want to update this phrase for the specific context described in this Jacob Savage essay on the Lost Generation, right, you could say conservative is a liberal who got mugged by human resources, or conservative is a liberal who got equityed out of a job, or conservative is a liberal whose resume hit a diversity filter, or conservative is a liberal who tried to enter the corporate workforce in the 2020s. So the structure of Irving Kristol's original aphorism relied on a specific psychological pivot, right? Stage one, liberal. You hold these abstract ideals about society, benevolence towards poor people and the unfortunate, and a commitment to historic justice and equality. That's now the dominant ethos since 2014. Then something happens, right? You suffer some kind of personal loss through the implementation or reality of your ideals, right? It might be crime, you're a victim of crime, or you're a victim of DEI. So now a person, after being mugged by reality, tries to recenter himself and look for where he can develop a more productive worldview. So we have a transition from the old right of neoconservatism to the new right, which is much more nationalist. And it represents this fundamental shift in identifying the source of danger. So in the 1960s and 70s, the source of danger was crime. And the problem was the government was incompetent or absent. Now the complaint is the government is too present, that the corporate sector has been weaponized against them. So in the 1960s, neoconservatives rebelled at the chaos from below. Now, many young white men are rebelling at what they see as the tyranny from above, right? So for the old right in the 1970s, the threat came from below. The threat was crime and mugging and street chaos. And the conservative argument was liberal permissiveness has allowed crime to fester. The state is failing at its most basic Hobbesian duty to protect the citizen from physical violence. Now, the new right in the 1920s says, oh, the threat comes from above. The mugging comes from DEI programs and cancellation. The real threat comes from administrative acts committed by the overclass, right? University deans and compliance officers, right? So the new argument is not the system is failing, but it's working exactly as it was designed to work to penalize specific groups, such as my group. So the shift in concern has moved from physical safety to social and economic status. Nature of the injury is shifted from the body to civic status. For the old right, the fear was visceral. It was about broken windows, graffiti, subway crime, bodily harm. Right, the new right, the fear is existential and economic. It's about being rendered unemployable, unbankable, and socially ostracized. So the reality mugging that young white men are complaining about these days is recognizing that their citizenship and their merit is now considered irrelevant because of his demographic classification. So now the antagonist has shifted from the thug to the manager, to the dean, to the mid-level bureaucrat, to the commissar, to the trust and safety officer. So in the neoconservative view, liberals were naive. They thought criminals could be rehabilitated with social programs. In the conservative view, the liberal is a useful idiot whose bleeding heart causes chaos. Now, in the new nationalist view, liberals and the progressive woke elite are malicious. They don't mistakenly exclude the legacy American demographic. They do it on purpose to achieve a transfer of power. And the mugging occurs in the interview process. It's not an accident. It's not part of a clumsy system. It is the specific objective of the reigning system. So in the 1970s, neoconservatives wanted the state to step in and restore order to the streets. In the 2020s, these nationalists want the state and HR departments to stop imposing their order on their lives.
The patriarchy. So, of course, now that we have the unhinged liberal women in charge of things, of course, logic doesn't matter anymore. I mean, that's kind of the result of this. It's men are slightly more, not even slightly, they're more linear thinkers. They are more logical. Women are more emotional. And
so the vice president retweeted this essay by Jacob Savage, and here he's speaking at Turning Point USA.
I have to admit, today solved one of the great insecurities that I had. Because as I've watched Nicki Manaj come out and declare her support for the truth, for courage, and for wisdom, I've had this little nagging voice in the back of my head wondering whether she thinks I look like the J.D. Vance meme. And it turns out, and I confirmed when she walked down the steps, Nicki Minaj actually knows what I really look like. And that is the best.
So one of the weakest arguments I find against J.D. Vance is that he is fake and inauthentic. And people who know him, right, describe somebody who's incredibly warm and spontaneous.
Best tribute that I could possibly imagine. I have to start off with a note of gratitude. Erica, I cannot thank you enough for your strength, your grace, and your kind words of support for this administration and for me personally.
The position of the observer is often a vital part of the data. I'm not as much of a believer in virtue ethics that you can teach people to be good. I'm much more a believer in recognizing the importance of situations so people can stay out of situations where they're going to do terrible things and instead try to keep themselves in situations that are much more aligned with what is best for them and for others. Because I notice it myself. When I lose at life, I withdraw, I feel aggrieved, I feel angry, I feel ungrateful, and I become more and more selfish. And the more I see nefarious forces dominating the world around me, I feel less loyalty to the system. The more I win at life, the happier I get, the more generous I get, the more outgoing I get, and the more loyalty I feel to the system. So I think much of social analysis is shaped by whether or not you feel like you're winning or losing at life. Right? If you're winning You want to justify the system. If you're losing, you want to demolish the system. Right? When you're winning, your brain gets flooded with all these beautiful biochemicals such as serotonin and dopamine. And this biochemical regulation affects your social outlook. Right? If you're succeeding, you conclude, well, it's because the system's functioning correctly. Right? I am succeeding because I am virtuous and I am hardworking, and the system rewards virtue and hard work. Right? Generosity tends to be a luxury of surplus. If someone's losing at life, it usually doesn't help to tell them to be less selfish and more generous, right? When you feel secure in your status, right, the entire threat detection system in your brain, in the amygdala, just quiets down, and you can afford to be more open and more benevolent, more generous, because you're less likely to see other people as threats and competitors with scarce resources, right? The winner wants to preserve the rules of the game that allow him to win. Now, when you're losing, or if you're just stagnating and others are rising above you, your brain feels a threat. You become paranoid, right? You recognize you're losing. You don't want to collapse into self-hatred, so you conclude the game is rigged against you. You begin to see invisible hands and cabals and systemic unfairness, right? Not always a delusion, but you get rising cortisol levels, you get rising anxiety, and you're very likely to enter a siege mentality and to be overcome by hostility, which makes you less pleasant to be around. And so you become more isolated and then more and more vulnerable to distorted paranoid thinking. So the optimists and the winners, right, will want to secure their tenure and their status and their wealth with the idea that the world's just getting better and safer and more rational, right? These are people like Steven Pinker, right? And they will tend to be blind to the rot because the floor has not fallen in on them yet, right? And the losers, right, people who feel displaced and ignored, they will be more likely to produce these series of catastrophe, conspiracy, and radical upheaval. They feel no stake in the current order, so they analyze it to destroy it. So winning produces high serotonin, perception of order, and a desire for stability. Losing reduces your serotonin levels, it increases your perception of chaos, and it makes you much more radical. And these key essays by Jacob Savage in Compact Magazine, and then the follow-up by Ross Douthat in the New York Times, right? They are products of the winner versus loser dynamic.
You lead an incredible movement at Turning Point, and I will fight alongside you and President Trump and every patriot in this room to defend the country that we so dearly love.
So I'm not a big fan of listening to politicians. If there is a politician I might find interesting on occasion, it is J.D. Vance. So there's a historian named Peter Turchin who's written a great deal about elite overproduction. So if you felt like you were destined for elite status and you don't achieve it, right, you're going to be mad and you're going to want to tear down the system. If you're able to achieve elite status, you're not going to want to tear down the system. You're going to want to embrace the system. So your perspective on the system will heavily depend upon whether you're winning or losing. Now, I often hear stoicism recommended for people who are not achieving the status that they think they deserve. Stoicism sounds great. I don't think it's a winning strategy for most people. It tends to promote a detached and apathetic stance. It diminishes usually the importance of connection with others. It encourages denial and suppression of natural, healthy emotions like grief, anger, and joy, rather than transforming or integrating them. Tends to lead to emotional flatness and unhealthy levels of repression. Tends to unrealistically minimize suffering and loss. Right? Tends to create passivity over taking action. Right? We have powerful genetic predispositions against stoicism. Right? When you try to adopt stoicism, you're usually going to war with nature. Stoicism sounds great, but you usually cannot simply think your way out of the biological reality of losing. Your pride level, right, largely reflects how much you contribute to the lives of others. So stoicism is going to fail the loser. It may well serve the winner, right? It's a really poor strategy for most people to try to handle their pain, right? If you feel anger and you can harness that anger to changing your situation, then you want to indulge your anger.
accusations out of the way, it has come to my attention that the most important thing to do at this point is combat the influence of Nick Fuentes. He is a danger and a threat, and my desire is to rob Nick Fuentes of his only good talking points, the things that are verifiably true, so that all he's left with is the deranged anti-Semitic Jew hatred, which he certainly fosters and spews. And so I would like to see him fall from glory. And that is my mission. And listen, you don't have to pay me to want to do that, okay? Whether or not people do pay me to want to do that is beside the point. The point is, what I'm here to do is there's a bunch of young men who would otherwise become Nick Fuentes fans.
So devoting yourself to going to war, whether it's against Nick Fuentes or going to war against poverty, for most people is a really losing strategy. So getting sober usually requires removing oneself from going to war.
And my job, my mission, is to discredit Nick Fuentes from the inside, okay? To give the impression that I am, in fact, also an anti-Semite, really, while trying to diffuse and dismantle anti-Semitism from within, right? By robbing it of its truth. That's my goal, okay? That's my explicit, stated goal. Now, am I being meta-ironic? I don't even know what that means. I don't even know what I believe anymore, which is honestly the perfect controlled opposition double agent. Luke chapter 12, verse 51.
What the
And Jesus said, "Do you think I came to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but division." What the fuck? First off, PF Young Media would like to issue the following statement regarding the Jews. Nobody loves the Jews more than PF Young Media. All Jews are made in the image of God. Anyone who tries to assert that because of someone's genetics they are predisposed to evil and therefore not worthy of the grace of God is themselves a degenerate scum, probably a pagan. The reason that PF Young Media endorses the phrase Christ is King is because it is a reminder to the pagans of Lithuania and Poland primarily, that the Teutonic Order was specifically in...
So the way most people try to practice Stoicism simply doesn't work, because they're going to war with biology, they're going to war with the natural healthy reactions of the body. It dampens their psychological powers. It tends to numb people and render them more apathetic. They become lobotomized, right? And the involuntary celibate, the incel phenomenon, is probably the most brutal proof of my theory, because it operates in the most primal market of all, sexual selection, right? When you're winning in the sexual marketplace, you just grow and grow and grow in charisma and social power, right? When you're losing, people get smaller and more withdrawn, right? So the Lost Generation crowd sees HR departments as a conspiracy against them, right? The sexually unsuccessful man begins to see biology and society as conspiracies against him. This is the black pill, right? And so the incel will adopt a rigorous scientific fatalism and obsess over jawlines and height, and they will buy into the rigged system analysis, right? It comforts them because it removes the burden of failure. I didn't lose because I'm bad. I lost because the game was decided at birth. They will see hypergamy as the enemy. They will view female nature of wanting to date up not as some kind of neutral biological imperative, not as a winning evolutionary strategy, but as some kind of nefarious force designed to humiliate them. And then they'll analyze social interactions with this same kind of paranoid precision that the failed political dissident uses to analyze regime propaganda. So the winners keep winning and the losers keep losing, right? When they say, you need to stop being so angry and bitter, that's why you're single. The reality is the anger and bitterness are the results of being single, not primarily the cause, right? If you ask a man who is losing to be bubbly and confident, right, that's asking a starving man to have better table manners. You cannot do it. So we have a global rise of opt-out cultures, right? When the price of winning becomes too high, the probability of success becomes too low, the rational actor does not try harder, they withdraw. Right? Winning triggers the release of serotonin and dopamine, which calms the amygdala and creates a perception of order and safety. And this will lead to a worldview favoring stability, generosity, and loyalty to the system. Right? Losing depletes these neurochemicals. It shifts the brain into a high threat detection mode that sees chaos all around them. Right? And this chemical state will curdle into usually a worldview defined by paranoia, radicalism, isolation, and a desire to destroy, to burn everything down. When you realize that you're not wanted professionally or sexually, right, you will naturally incline towards a protective withdrawal and a deep anger and resentment. And this internal emotional state will likely harden into an external conviction the world is rigged and dominated by nefarious forces. So if you feel the system is predatory, if you feel like the system offers you nothing, right, then you're likely to stop playing the game. There is a more productive alternative to Stoicism, and that's vitalism, right? Embracing the body, the soul, the church, the synagogue, the tribe as the last sovereign state, right? If you recognize the life-denying and biologically unrealistic nature of Stoicism, there may be a more useful philosophical alternative in vitalism, right? And there are certainly people pushing vitalism that fill me with horror, such as Bronze Age pervert. But there are good things in the vitalist perspective. There are any number of wonderful things that result when you recognize those parts of your life where you can engage in sovereignty and where you can build something. And that's very likely to be in connection with your church, your tribe, your synagogue, your body, your ability to develop mastery, right? You can rightly devote energy and attention to things where you can develop your mastery, develop your connection with others, and find some kind of realm of sovereignty.
Invented to wipe out the disgusting European pagans. And so it is a glorious, glorious thing to be a Christian who rebukes the disgusting paganism that rejects the idea of universal grace and the idea that all people are made in the image of God. And anyone who conflates the genetics of someone with the ideology of someone is themselves a vile pagan and should be thrown into the cleansing fire of God. This is the word of the Teutonic Order, the Ritterbuter, who are the best faction in Medieval II Total War, the Crusades campaign. Thank you for listening to my statement. Let's begin. This is Rabbi Yehuda Kapulin, Trump's pick for U.S. anti-Semitism czar. Says the State Department is going to have a whole division to battling anti-Semitism on the internet. Let's watch.
The president is sending a very strong message. Think about it. Ironically, I get off a plane. I am the president's representative, and I am walking off with a yarmulke, and I have kosher food, and embassies will have kosher food. It is a game changer. The appointment is a game changer. And it's not about history. It's about education. And how do we educate? Indonesia has 350 million.
Right, this is just stupidity. You can't educate people out of hating another tribe because we are wired to hate those who are different from us when they threaten us, right? Sometimes different groups have different interests. You're not going to insert Holocaust education and morally improve people. You can't educate people out of recognizing conflicts of interest between groups.
Muslims living in the country, how do we change their textbooks? How do we hold the people in Gaza accountable that if America is paying for UN textbooks and supposedly the changes are made, why are those textbooks not being used and why are they using their old textbooks? We have to teach people it's not okay to educate your kids to be a martyr.
True. Everything so far, kosher, one might say.
Okay? And we have to hold those countries accountable. How do we battle anti-Semitism on the internet? How are we doing better on algorithms? What companies can we work with? We are going to have a whole division within the office of the Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism that is going to work on technology and working with the greatest leaders in technology, many of whom are Jewish and have offered their assistance.
Oh, that doesn't sound good. Okay, so if the system's not working for you, you're going to have a different attitude towards the system. And I'm not a fan of Bronze Age pervert, but I recognize his appeal to some people. And what he does is rebrand the system as, oh, the system's run by these bug men, right? The longhouse, right? This spiritually castrated, physically weak, biologically domesticated, fearful of life, fearful of germs, fearful of giving offense, enslaved to social approval losers, right? So he tells the struggling loser, right, you're not a failure. You're a wild animal trapped in a zoo. The people you envy, they are just well-fed livestock. And so what we need are a counter-elite, right? People who cite Nietzsche and Heraclitus, Clytus and Carl Schmitt and obscure pre-Socratic history, right? You signal to your audience, the lost generation of overproduced elites, I am smart like you, right? I read the books that you read. So you mix this philosophy with bodybuilding slang, crude insults, deliberate grammatical errors, pidgin English, and memes, and you create someone like Bronze Age pervert. And this bypasses the midwit filter, right? Succeeds. The speaker has the intelligence to succeed in the system, but has chosen to reject the system. So Now, the audience for this message, they get to feel like they are the true aristocrats, right? They're aristocrats of the soul. And you may be losing at life, but you can claim to yourself, hey, at least I see through the BS, right? You don't blame capitalism or the boomers. You blame the goop. You argue that modern life itself with its seed oils and microplastics and SSRIs and pornography and estrogenic chemicals is all some part of a coordinated elite assault on the male spirit. So now you want to eat clean and you want to lift weights, right? These aren't hobbies. These are acts of political warfare. You're going to reject the slop, the processed food, the degenerate culture, because you were at war with a nefarious force. I remember when I was ill with chronic fatigue syndrome, I started listening to Dennis Prager and started corresponding with him. And in the summer of 1989, Dennis Prager sent me a letter, get well, you are needed in the fight for good values, right? Dennis Prager enlisted me in the war against evil. And that provided a lot of sustenance for me when I was losing at life. So when you're losing at life, this easily curdles into depression and nihilism. So the new right uses extreme humor and absurdism to try to keep the energy vital rather than defeated. Right? We may be economically disenfranchised, we may be lonely, but to focus on that, that is depressing. So instead, you'll see memes of tropical beaches and Greek statues and frogs in military uniforms, right? You're no longer losers, you're part of a cool secret club, right? This live stream is not a failure because I only have 11 live viewers right now on YouTube. It's just a cool secret club. This is a way to turn resentment and bitterness and anger into love of one's fate. So you acknowledge your loss. Yes, you've been robbed of your future by the system. You identify the enemy. The system is run by bug men who want to crush your animal spirits. You reject stoic acceptance. You're not just going to endure it. You're going to mock the enemy. You're going to build your body. You're going to read the classics, and you're going to wait for the collapse. Right? This is a new shadow hierarchy where people who lose in the real world feel like kings of a better, older, mythical world. So here's a biographical profile of this archetype. Right? Early years, you suffer with the meritocratic illusion. Right? You're told that you're gifted, that if you just work hard in school, that you will be rewarded. You believe in institutions. You believe that you follow what you're told, that you will create a great life. Then you find your career stalling after university. You've got more and more debt. You expect your career to launch. It never launches. You just find closed door after closed door. You see unpaid internships, precarious gig works, a contracting industry. You watch the institutions that you thought were fair pivoting to a new ideological mandate that explicitly deprioritizes people like you. Your meritocratic illusion cracks. You realize the game has changed. The rules have been changed in the middle of the game. So you descend into a loser psychology, right? Your serotonin has gone down. You're working a job that you're overqualified for. You have all these roommates. You face a dating market where your lack of status makes you invisible to the women that you most want, right? Your brain enters a high-threat, low-resource mode. You feel that nefarious forces are out to get you, right? You try stoicism. You try journaling away the anger. It only makes you more of a loser, right? So you're exhausted, right? You just lie flat. You give up, you withdraw, you stop trying to gain status, you stop trying to date, you isolate, you spend your surplus time online, right? You go into an internal exile. Then you discover the new right or the distant sphere, right? You listen to podcasts that mock the people that you used to envy. You hear that your own anger is not a sickness, it is energy. Stop seeing yourself as a loser, start adopting the barbarian identity, right? You stop seeing yourself as a failed journalist, start viewing yourself as a spiritual aristocrat in exile. You join a gym, becomes your new church. You channel your aggrieved energy into lifting weights, right? You use testosterone replacement therapy to create a winner's chemistry. You adopt a rigid diet. You reject the slop of the modern world. You become physically imposing, right? You create a visible separation between yourself and the soft society around you. You're no longer generous or loyal to the system. You're now a radical, waiting for the longhouse to collapse. Waiting for feminism to collapse, DEI to collapse. So in this new mythical hierarchy, right, people like you will replace the losers. Right? This is the counter-elite. It's the single most dangerous class for any regime. They usually don't reintegrate into polite society quietly.
What?
work on technology and working with the greatest leaders in technology, many of whom are Jewish and have offered their assistance. The office is going to be revamped entirely to be one of the highest profile offices in the State Department because that's what the secretary wants and that's what the president wants. So we are going to have a very, very strong mandate on education, on protecting people, and how are we able to make a huge difference in combating what goes on.
Okay, so Special Envoy to the President of the United States is saying he's going to work with the leaders of technology, because they're Jewish, in order to combat anti-Semitism online. Interesting. Okay, so I was under the impression that anti-Semitism online doesn't mean anything. Nobody cares about this issue. It doesn't affect the public. So then why are we now entertaining the prospect of mass digital surveillance in order to combat a national security threat? Now, of course, surely no one is talking about anti-Semitism as a national security threat, right? And surely no one in that realm.
So why do very smart people like this rabbi say really stupid things? Because they get status for it, right? If most people are given the opportunity between status and losing status, right, they're going to be willing to say the most ridiculous things to try to increase their status.
Of whatever suggests that, for example, criticizing Israel or criticizing Netanyahu is a type of Jew hatred and therefore would fall into the category of national security threat that needs to be combated, right? This is what the paranoid people believe. All right, let me just lay it out very clearly. The paranoid people believe that there are powerful people in, the realm of technology, surveillance, all that stuff, who genuinely believe that anti-Semitism is a national security threat and would be willing to deploy Chinese-style authoritarian surveillance systems to clamp down on anti-Semitism. That's what the paranoid people believe. And these paranoid people would say, these are the kind of people who would say criticizing Netanyahu or Israel is a form of anti-Semitism, right? And that whole mentality is so obviously paranoid, right? It's not like there's, conferences about national security and anti-Semitism and it being like a pressing cause that, could justify authoritarian clampdowns on, wait, who is this? Sebastian Gorka? This is advisor to the President of the United States? What's he got to say?
The poison of anti-Semitism, which has plagued mankind for centuries, has visited us now and again in this century. And it still courses through the veins of cowards in dark corners of the world. Anti-Semitism today hides behind geopolitics. Oh, I'm not an anti-Semite. I just don't like the government of Bibi Netanyahu. No, you're a Jew hater.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. So if you, just to be clear, sorry, hold on, wait a second. Sorry, let me just get my thinking cap on. So if you say, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm just critical of Benjamin Netanyahu, you are a Jew hater. Oh, interesting. Well, but that would mean then that would qualify as the kind.
Different tribes have different interests, and in different circumstances, they're going to have different enemies. This applies to all tribes, to my tribe, to your tribe, to tribes that I've never heard of. Right? It depends on the situation who your enemy is going to be. So this P.F. Jung guy, he makes some pretty sharp critiques here.
Okay, this is just an example, everyone. Right, I'm surrounded by enemies. I'm surrounded by assholes. So I tweeted, at this point, I refuse to believe Nick Fuentes is a real person. I did hate the modern rustic farmhouse vibes, though. Unreal. Now, we're gonna watch this clip.
Amir Odom has been on fire lately. He just dropped another video on you reacting to the Piers interview. Gang. He, Brett, Crowder, the most unlikely people have, so far, turned out to be the realest ones.
Yeah, for real, folks. People with integrity. People with integrity. How about Brett Cooper, huh? Brett Cooper is on fire. She goes, I don't know if he likes me. He hates me. He loves me. I love Brett Cooper. I love Brett Cooper. I think she's great. I think she's terrific. I take back what I said. Here's the thing, though. I did hate her wedding. That's just a taste. That's a matter of taste. I did hate the cowboy hat and the rustic modern farmhouse vibes. That's like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Like, I had to attack that. It's like those videos of the turtle. You ever see those videos of the tortoise and they put a white shoe in front of him and he doesn't react? You put a black shoe in front of him and he starts hitting it with his head. That's like me with a wedding like that. So I had to do it. But she's excellent. She's great. Very surprisingly on point. W. Brett. I guess I'm a Brett head. I'm a Cooper. I'm a Cooper head.
So, objectively hilarious. So, it's like, okay, imagine one subset of the Nick Fuentes fan base, right? They love this guy. He's correct. He's fighting for us, okay? So he says in this, I didn't like her wedding. It's a matter of taste. By the way, at no point in this tweet did I say he's wrong. It's just hilarious that he would say that. Okay, and then what happens? What does a small subset of his fans do? It's generic and LARPy. Look at us, we're trad farmers. Oh no, someone prefers a different aesthetic. How awful. He's literally right. Using your wedding as a LARP for clout is insanely gay and cringe. It's like, wait a minute, wait.
All right, so you can loathe Nick Fuentes, but you have to admit when he's funny. You can loathe Tucker Carlson, but you have to admit when he's the most effective public speaker on the conservative side of the political spectrum in America today. Virtually everyone who knows Tucker Carlson personally likes him. That doesn't mean he's right. That doesn't mean he hasn't increasingly traveled down to a lower and lower IQ audience, that he's not increasingly embracing bizarre conspiracy theories. But you can recognize people are flawed. And they can be wrong about one thing and hilarious about something else.
Wait a minute. Look. It's one thing to be a fan of Nick Fuentes. If you're gonna defend every possible take as if it's like it's true, that fucking gay farmhouse look, it's like pick your battles, okay? Fair.
And Brett Cooper has some pretty sharp, smart things to say at times, right? She provides a valuable service at times. So let's check in with one of her recent videos.
Somebody diverse got the role. Like, it was just so expected. And 10 years later, it's only gotten more blatant. For example, comedian Tyler Fisher went public with the story of how an agent decided that they could not rep him because he was a straight white male. Listen to this.
This has been happening for about 10 years. Every once in a while, a casting director would say, hey, I want to submit you for this job, but we're not really doing the white guy thing right now. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And it happened more and more frequently. And then this agent that I am suing, or manager rather, reached out and said, we love you. We want to get you auditions for Curb Your Enthusiasm, all this stuff. And said, great. A few months later, they reach out, said, we want to get you on the phone. So I'm sitting there like, all right, here we go. Finally, it's all happening. And he goes, we hit a snag. We really love you. We think you're a star, but we're not taking white guys. And I was just like, what the been at this for 15 years. Not that I deserve anything, If I went my whole career without getting booked on something, but I at least had the opportunity to audition, I'd feel okay about that.
And that's the key point. You at least want the opportunity to get your foot in the door, to at least feel like maybe you're being considered based on merit, even if you don't get the job. If it's in Hollywood, if it's in any other industry, people are just asking for the opportunity to be considered equally. I thought we cared about equality, but of course it's more about equity these days. And, Tyler's story, it's not just hearsay. He actually has the recording of that conversation. Listen to this.
Is it a policy, explicit, that they're not taking on any white men, or is it case by case?
On-camera talent, stand-up, probably not. No.
Okay, so no white men are allowed for on-camera stuff.
I guess it's right now where it stands, but it could change in a year depending on if casting directors, that's not their feedback anymore, or not even casting directors, studios, whatever it may be, where it's this is what we're looking for.
So yeah, Tyler, why don't you just sit on your hands and hope that the world is going to change in a year? Now, obviously, that did not happen. Tyler recorded that audio multiple years ago. Looking these men. Hollywood mocked them relentlessly. Journalists spat in their faces. And now, come 2025, everyone's looking around going, hey, why are you so upset? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. What's the problem? Men, this is the problem. And it has been brewing for over a decade. In a recent episode, Tucker Carlson touched on this. Listen to what he said.
They've grown up in, over the last 10 years, a world that hates them. And not in a subtle way. Openly. With a Hutu-like directness and ferocity. They've grown up in a country that has systematically, in law, excluded them from the workplace, from education, from federal grants, and has told them again and again and again, no, we're not discriminating against you, and yes, you deserve it. Imagine growing up like that. And again, This isn't behind the scenes. This is way out in the open. And not only has it done exactly that to young white men, of course, white men being the one group who are officially excluded under DEI. There's only one, it's white men, white straight men. It's not whining. And by the way, this happens to be the one group in America who, by and large, have been taught for cultural reasons, don't whine. Don't talk about yourself so much. No one wants to hear your story. And whatever you do, don't be the victim. All of that's good advice, by the way. But this group has not only been excluded with the force of law by the Justice Department in every state and at every college and university with.
All right, so people like Brett Cooper and Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and P.F. Jung, they develop audiences because they're able to articulate what's going on for other people, for their audience who can't articulate it, right? People come and gravitate to a Tucker or a Nick because, or a Mike Benz, because these are people who articulate their experience of reality.
Maybe 3 exceptions. They've been mocked and attacked and lectured and harangued and screamed at.
So there you have it. And obviously,
so what else have I got lined up here? The Lost Generation, my personal story of how DEI discriminates against millennial white men, from a bloke in the United Kingdom here.
Now, these next comments with regard to ESG and DEI are general in nature. They apply right across industry. And this is part of an institutional industry. But how does it all work? So, we have ESG scores, environmental, social and governance. And these scores are used by investors to make investment decisions in businesses to some extent. And the S, social, includes ethnicity and sort of gender split in the workforce. ESG scores are supposed to make businesses more responsible, considering more than just revenue and profit. And then what they do is they create performance targets that are tied to those diversity targets. And those performance targets are tied to pay. So bonuses will often be tied to achieving diversity targets within the workforce. And the logic is that that plays into the ESG scores and therefore directly into the share price of businesses. But then some businesses will say that ethnicity and gender do not play into hiring or redundancy decisions, but they absolutely do. And in the UK, this is even legal. It's legal on the basis of the Equalities Act of 2010. I'll quickly read some comments that relate to the Equality Act of 2010. Public bodies must advance equality, not just avoid bias. That includes removing disadvantages and boosting participation where it is low. The law even says you can treat some groups more favourably to achieve those aims. Training, outreach, ring-fence development is lawful if proportionate to reduce group disadvantage. If 2 candidates are equally qualified, you can pick the underrepresented group to correct an imbalance. But whether 2 candidates are equal or not is subjective. In practice, diversity targets become a priority, with the justification that the ideology is fighting against oppression, racism, and just general discrimination, ironically, whilst discriminating itself on those same characteristics. And if this is ever recognised or referred to in any sense whatsoever, it's called positive discrimination. But there's nothing positive about it at all. It's just discrimination. It's racism and sexism, and it's overt, and it's institutionalized in law and in business. As I said, this started slow during my career, but it really picked up speed with the BLM movement and the Me Too movement. It resulted in caste systems such as this one being created. Luckily for me, I had made it into a senior position by the time these movements really kicked off. Now I'll explain how this functions from a hiring manager's perspective. So I reviewed hundreds of CVs during my time in various managerial roles within the financial services industry in London. What happened was that originally, many years ago, the CVs that I would receive would be very diverse. You'd have a wide range of people who are applying for roles, and then you'd make a decision as a hiring manager, the best person for the role, or the best person to interview, and then find out who's the best person for the role. What happened over time was the CVs that I would receive as a hiring manager would be less and less diverse. They would be increasingly women and increasingly minority ethnic groups, to the point that it was very rare to get a white male CV. So what was happening is that CVs were being submitted as part of an application process, and then HR were filtering some of them out. And later in this video, I'll explain how that filtration process works. So as a hiring manager, the only CVs that you got to see and the only candidates that you got to consider were those that had already been approved by HR. Then in redundancy decisions, as if by magic, the white men would appear at the top of the shortlists. Now, I'm not going to go into any more detail on this. You're going to have to read between the lines for reasons that will become clear later in this video. I was once told that I had to diversify one of my teams that was in a very highly majority white town in the UK. And what happens is you get very good at outwardly not noticing whilst actually noticing. And you do this as a survival mechanism because you know that if you notice too much, you'll end up on one of those lists very quickly. So I tried not to notice the dramatic demographic changes that were happening all around me in the office. And I tried not to notice the ridiculous demographics of the graduate group that I gave a presentation to try to help them in their careers. And never did I, and nor do I now, blame anyone other than the leaders of those organisations, the thought leaders, and the executives. They are the people who are to blame. It's not the fault of the people who took advantage of opportunities that were before them, hard-working, smart people. None of this is their fault. But now I'm very much noticing publicly, because I've been forced into this position, as will become increasingly clear in this video, and now I'm speaking about it as well. This next bit's a bit emotional for me. So, I was one of the lucky ones. I got in the door as the door was closing, as it became more difficult. I was made redundant in 2023. So I ended up on one of those lists, as did a large number of my colleagues. So I signed a termination contract, which contains clauses that limit what I can say. This is standard practice for businesses. Since 2023, I've applied for over 300 jobs. Not all senior jobs, but all kinds of jobs. I've had 2 interviews out of 300 applications. For example, I applied for a frontline role at Amazon in a department the likes of which I'd managed entirely in a very complicated and competitive industry. Despite what I thought was acing that interview, I didn't get the job. That was one of 2 interviews I got out of 300 applications. I wrote 10 different versions of my CV. I wrote countless cover letters. I wrote them all individually. I treated it as a job. I did everything I possibly could. My CV has a track record within a highly competitive industry, showing that I've demonstrated the ability to succeed and delivered remarkable results for a company. But none of this matters, and I know exactly why it doesn't matter. This stuff is really difficult to say publicly. During this process of applying for hundreds of jobs over years, I actually had to sell my belongings, a huge amount of my belongings. And I'm recording this video on a phone that's, I think, 3-4 years old, or maybe even more. That's why the colours look really weird in my videos. I can't do anything about it. And while I was struggling, trying to find jobs, supporting a family, I saw that the United Kingdom had signed a trade deal with India. And in this trade deal are certain terms. One of those is that staff in India can be seconded to the UK for temporary periods, maybe 3 years, I think it is. And during that period, the business doesn't have to pay national insurance for that worker. And the worker doesn't have to pay national insurance either. This makes it much cheaper for businesses to hire people from India than to hire people like me here in the UK. And I know how all of this works because a lot of the businesses in the UK have subsidiaries in India. They're Indian businesses.
And there are similar things going on in the United States, which is why it's increasing fixation on the online right to turn down the number of H-1B visas granted so that people can be brought in overseas to undercut the wages of Americans. So nationalism has its virtues and its downsides. Globalism has its virtues and its downsides. The free market has its virtues and its downsides. Liberalism has its virtues and its downsides. Orthodox Judaism, Orthodox Christianity, liberal Judaism, liberal Christianity have their virtues and their downsides. So India has shifted in a much more Hindu nationalist direction. If the United States moves in a more Christian nationalist direction, there will be some benefits and there will be some downsides, right? It will be good for some people, bad for other people. So what's going on with India and all the Indians in the American tech industry? So it used to be that the old guard of Indian elites were socialists, right? They were Western-educated secular elites whose intellectual lineage stemmed from British socialism, right? And they were quite capable and incentivized to mirror Western liberal norms, and so that made them a lot easier for the American establishment to absorb. Now, nationalism, Hindu nationalism, has taken power in India during the Modi era, and so Indians arriving in America these days are much more openly ethnocentric. They're much more Hindu, they're much more Hindu nationalist, right? They're much more pragmatic, and this has created a citizenry that is proud, that is tribal, that is self-interested, and much less interested in mimicking the liberal and socialist norms of Westerners. So in the Evelyn Waugh novel Scoop, right, the quote for the dominant publication is, the beast stands for strong, mutually antagonistic governments everywhere, right? You support nationalism, you essentially support strong, mutually antagonistic governments everywhere, right? That's the paradox of nationalism. If you're an American nationalist, right, you will likely approve of India's turn towards nationalism. You'll recognize that it improves the quality of governance in India. And you'll recognize that nationalism will incentivize more and more self-assertion. So now we have colliding nationalist identities, right? Hindu nationalism versus liberal American culture. And they don't blend, they collide. They get on each other's nerves. And this is inevitable when you have a rise of strong, mutually antagonistic nationalisms. So this is where you're seeing increasing hostility to Indian immigrants who are much more nationalistic and self-interested as opposed to signing on for liberal Western socialist norms. Jeremy Carl wrote the original book on anti-white discrimination, and you can see he's a little peeved that now Jacob Savage has stepped onto his turf.
That I'm sitting here talking to you about all these things, and that I've chosen the kind of path that I've chosen. But I think one of the great things about the internet more broadly is, yeah, okay, fine. Like, it doesn't matter that you went to Yale or Harvard or wherever you went. Like, how good is your work? Like, that's what ultimately matters. And so I think, again, our side, because we are less focused on these credentials and because we don't have that kind of credentialing ecosystem, has led to great opportunities.
The American veneration and fixation on credentials was one of the things that shocked me when I moved from Australia to America at age 11. All sorts of jobs that were possible for an Australian were not possible for that same Australian who moves to America because they don't have the credentials.
For guys like you and Matt Walsh and many, many others with a lot of talent to just rise to the top. That having been said, which is all wonderful, I think it is also a challenge for us that we don't have as many credentialing groups.
And giving great priority to credentials, is that just all bad? No, it comes with strengths and weaknesses, just like minimizing the power of credentials, right? Strengths and weaknesses for each approach.
As we'd like. My friends at American Moment are trying to do this with young DC staffers at Claremont, where I am a fellow, which is, of course, itself an institution with at least some prestige in our part of the world. But what we try to do with our fellows that, we have, 40 to 50 or maybe a little bit more, maybe 50 to 75 or whatever per year who come in for our programs. But if you just go through that, even for a couple weeks of intensive training, you're sort of giving a signal to the broader marketplace on our side that, hey, this is a capable person and it's an aligned person. So I think we do need to come up with our own credentialing institutions to a degree. Having said that, I do think it's an advantage that we also have an easier time of organically elevating good talent than the left is.
Yeah, obviously owning institutions is better than not owning institutions. Right. So while it's great to, of course, to win, like a...
And Aaron Wren made the observation that the right can only take over institutions from the top down because generally it lacks the human capital to make the long, slow march through institutions that led the left to power.
Guerrilla war at some level, eventually you want a regular army, right? Like that's kind of the goal. So and there should be a scenario where talented guys is good enough. Like everyone doesn't have to be a savant. Everybody doesn't have to be a once in a generation talent.
As a kind of principal reason I left my doctoral program at Stanford, I just didn't see a place for me that didn't involve me totally selling out, even though I'd kind of run the gauntlet in a way that was very, very difficult to do as a conservative. But I've said this a couple times, not a lot publicly, but I'll say it again here, right? Like, if the left has found me to be a little bit of a pain or difficulty, and I certainly hope they have, because I want to be their enemy, in a normal, happy world, I would be a history professor at Iowa State University, right? Like, I'm not a Harvard talent, right? Like, for that faculty, right? Like, I'm not claiming that I was like God's gift to genius, but I was a smart and capable enough guy that, in a sort of more level playing field, I would have been happily.
So in an elite world, hostile to men often over the past 10 years or so, there's intermittently recognition that men have special gifts. You saw this after 9/11, the praise and veneration and admiration for the firefighters who went into the 9/11 towers. And now, a week ago, we're talking about the Islamic terror massacre on Bondi Beach, and the people who ran towards the terrorists to take them down were overwhelmingly men. The people who ran towards the victims on Bondi Beach to provide first aid, overwhelmingly men. And in the Financial Times, the voice of the establishment, you have a column today in praise of male courage. It's a cultural and existential companion to the specific professional grievance outlined in the Lost Generation essay by Jacob Savage, right? The Lost Generation focuses on the economic and institutional exclusion of white millennial men. And now you have an essay talking about the virtues of men. And when you don't venerate male virtues, you get fewer demonstrations of male virtues, right? By recognizing that in certain situations, men tend to have distinctive gifts, just as in other situations, women have distinctive gifts, right? That Jews have demonstrated extraordinary capabilities in certain situations, and Aborigines have extraordinary abilities in other situations, right? Different people have different gifts, right? Men do most of the horrific murdering in the world, right? But it's also men who stop a lot of this horrific murder in the world. So if we promote a culture that actively roots and discriminates against men, we are going to get fewer demonstrations of male virtues such as bravery.
Teaching at some, respectable state school somewhere in a history or political science department, I would have been happy. I would not have caused the regime any problems. But because the regime basically told me, hey, you're white, you're male, and you're a conservative, we don't have any interest in you. I had to go fight against the regime because the only other option was to kind of shrink and just kind of accept my fate, which is, unfortunately, again, my criticism of the article is implicitly it's kind of elevating people who have done just that. And I think that's obviously not acceptable.
Yeah, it's funny because it in some ways, again, though this is far from ideal and not what we wanted, but in some ways, you end up creating even more powerful enemies, because if they had just allowed a guy of, if they had just allowed me to, be a staffer in some congressional office, or, be a TA, for some professor, I probably would have just been safely contained inside the system. I would have been more than happy with getting a middling professorship somewhere. And, like that would have been great. I would have loved that. I would have thought I would have achieved my greatest goals. Now I'm out here in situations I didn't even know to dream about because of, because I had to do it on my own. I had to break through. I had to go out.
So sometimes some loss and some losing inspires people to go on to do something greater. I'm not claiming that Orrin McIntyre is doing something greater. He says so many dumb things, and sometimes he says some smart things. So he's a mixed bag like me and probably like you. So there are two essential books for understanding the age of the lost generation by Ronnie Goldman, right? So this Jacob Savage essay, The Lost Generation, argues that a cohort of white male millennials in creative and academic fields of journalism, TV writing, and academia have been systematically lost, right? Sacrificed to diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates that accelerated around 2014, and that many white, older male elites, boomers, and Gen X retained their power. But the entry-level and mid-career doors were shut on young white men who found themselves facing brutal structural barriers and opaque hiring processes that explicitly, actively, racially discriminated against them. So Ronnie Goodman's got two books out that are worth a read, Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression and The Star Chamber of Stanford, where he talks about his experience at Stanford Law School. And they add theoretical and psychological depth to the topics covered in this Jacob Savage essay. So Ronnie Goodman describes the progressive clerisy. He describes woke and the dominant left mindset that stands over our institutions. He describes it as a mutation of Reform Christianity, a secularized mutation of Reform Christianity, so that you have gatekeepers in the media, in Hollywood, in academia, and in our institutions, effectively acting in lockstep to enforce new identity-based norms where certain identities are privileged and other identities are actively discriminated against. And so all sorts of specific demographics, such as white Christian men, discriminated against. So we have these gatekeepers, the progressive clerisy, this secular priesthood comprised of elites in academia, media, bureaucracy, and over most of our institutions. And they don't tend to wield their power through direct force, but through persuasion and instruction and regulation of social norms. Right? We're not talking about just a series of arbitrary HR decisions. We're talking about the operation of a particular hero system. And it's a biological imperative to have a hero system. It's a biological imperative to feel like certain things are heroic and other things are cowardly, certain things are right, certain things are wrong. So liberalism is the hero system that denies it's a hero system, right? It claims to be objective, and it claims that it believes in rule by experts. It's really a covert, partisan, subjective hero system that believes itself to rise above the benighted, uneducated, privileged white men and those bitter clingers to guns and religion to champion the oppressed. And this kind of racial discrimination described in Jacob Savage's essay, well, that's just a ritual sacrifice required to maintain the clericy's moral self-image. And there is such an enormous disconnect between the official narrative that DEI is benign, it's just making the world more fair, and what is the lived reality for many people who feel like the world is aligned against them. So if you are systematically racially discriminated against, you may well feel crazy or bitter, right? Whether you're black or brown or yellow or red or white, right? If you feel like the system is screwing you over, but no one's ever honest about it, it can make you feel crazy. So Ronnie Goodman's memoir is a case study in being gaslit by the institution of Stanford Law, having his career suffocated while denying that it was doing anything of the sort. So Ronnie Goodman is very good at sketching out how liberal institutions specialize in plausible deniability. They all maintain this facade of neutral, meritocratic procedures while informally enforcing a strict ideological conformity. So the unofficial reality, the shadow set of rules that everyone knows but no one will publicly admit, creates this invisible curriculum and these racially discriminatory hiring schemes that Jacob Savage describes in his essay, The Lost Generation.
Outside the system. And I think that's true of a number of people. I think they actually are honing, Arrakis was made to train the faithful, it's one of those situations where ultimately we become much, much stronger because the only way
that we're out here, that we're taking a much more oppositional tactic to the regime than we would have otherwise, and that there's all sorts of spaces that open up because of that.
So, this is not exactly the same thing, but it's tangential. Vivek Ramaswamy recently released an article, I believe it was through the New York Times, on what is an American. And in that piece, he gave more or less the responses you would expect. It's,
All right, about to get some edgy stuff here from these two white blokes. But back to the power of Ronnie Goodman's book, The Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression. So Ronnie sketches how the liberalizing, civilizing process that runs our institutions, right, tries to tamp down our primitive, atavistic, pre-modern impulses, right, traits that are often coded as masculine, aggressive, or traditional. So this exclusion is not just about excluding certain demographics. It's about extinguishing certain type of consciousness, certain ways of being that the liberal ethos finds intolerable. Right, so the lost generation is lost because they embody a certain self-identity, a porous understanding of reality that the star chamber of modern liberal culture wants to filter out. So Jacob Savage's essay documents the crime, right, the systemic racial immiseration of a specific demographic to satisfy these institutional mandates. Ronnie Goodman's books provide the motive and the weapon, that this is effectively a type of religious purge carried out by a secular clergy that uses plausible deniability to frame its subjective sectarian power grab as just neutral progress. So it's not just that the lost generation is a victim of bad timing. It is the necessary other, the enemy, against which modern liberal identity defines its own virtue.
It's kind of the same stump speech he gives everywhere. It's been interesting because Vivek has started to try to answer this question after his disaster H-1B blowout, and the fact that he seems to be losing in Ohio despite being a endorsed Republican candidate. And
so as Indians rise in nationalism and Americans rise in nationalism, you get a lot of tension between the two groups, and you see more and more overt hostility to Indians on the part of American nationalists.
Have the scenario where it feels like he's trying to situate himself slightly more favorably in that discussion.
And the chat says, any comment on people referring to the Holocaust as the Holly? Well, I didn't expect that which is important to me to be vitally important to you, right? Different groups have different hero systems and different victimologies, and it is naive to expect that the victimology of, say, Jews is going to be a good fit for the victimology of other groups. Right? The more intense your in-group identity, the more intense your sense of victimhood. If you don't have an intense Jewish identity, all right, you are not going to be pleased by a great focus on the Holocaust. Any comments on Joshua Hammer saying that Dave Smith is a Hellenized Jew and why it's so bad to assimilate and have your country be more important than Jewishness? Yeah, I don't agree with that. I don't think someone who is, say, an American first before they are a Jew is a bad Jew. They just have a different hero system. Right? If someone's socialism is more important to them than their Jewish identity, I don't think that makes them a bad person or a bad Jew. For some Jews, their Jewish identity, their Jewish practice, their love of Torah study, their nationalism, their Zionism is more important to them than other considerations. For other groups, their profession, their family, their particular political, social, or cultural ideology is more important to them than their Jewish identity. I don't think there's one objective hero system which should rule over all others. Right? You're not a bad Jew because you have a less intense in-group Jewish identity than me. You're not necessarily a superior Jew because you have a more intense in-group identity than me. Right? We live in an age of tremendous freedom where for most American Jews, their American identity is more important to them than their Jewish identity, and there are many wonderful things that come with that. And then from my more Orthodox traditional Jewish perspective, there are some bad things that come with that. But I have a particular subjective hero system that required a subjective leap of faith that in all likelihood, is quite different from your hero system.
And the article really just goes through, if you work hard and you believe in success, and I don't know why he doesn't see how shallow and vapid and meaningless that is. But increasingly, these answers are getting worse and worse, and they are just not working, especially on younger generations. I think the same young, especially white men who have been pushed out of these institutions are looking at answers like Vivek and thinking, I worked hard. I believed in all of these things, and I got nowhere. This country is not for me. It's not for Americans, because hardworking Americans aren't getting anywhere. And I think there's just a fundamental inability of a guy like Vivek to acknowledge the situation that these guys have been placed in and ultimately find any meaningful solutions. How do you think about that conversation of what is an American running alongside this anti-white discrimination? I mean, these conversations probably aren't happening simultaneously for no reason.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm going to try to respond to Vivek's article because I think at one level it was encouraging that at least he sort of showed some awareness of the type of critiques that were being made that was a little deeper than I've seen before. And again, just like this article getting out there, that's great. This is, dare I say it, I don't even know if it really is Gandhi, but the first they ignore you and then they laugh at you and then they fight you and then you win. We're moving up that incline here. At least, we're somewhere between being laughed at and they're fighting us. But yeah, there's a resistance. And again, I want to be very fair here to Vivek and others, kind of maybe who might be somewhat similarly situated. I have a human understanding of his wanting to say it's all creedal. And yes, I can get off. I mean, he was actually born in the U.S., but you could get off the boat, X years ago and be just as American as somebody whose ancestry goes back to the Mayflower. But this pure creedal Americanism just doesn't, it's illogical in it.
There's no inherent reason why a civic nationalist identity is just inherently globally, philosophically inferior to an ethnically nationalist identity or a religious nationalist identity or a globalist identity. All right, it just entirely depends on the nature of your hero system. So nationalism always contains a religious element, a cultural element, a racial and ethnic element, an ideological and civic element. Right? People's identities and commitments are complicated.
Of its own kind of, even on its own terms, it just doesn't make any sense if you think about it for 2 seconds. That isn't to say that creedal or certain views are not part of you being an American, but my simple answer to Vivek would be, okay, well, let's look at that list of things that he says, and it's like free market and free ideas. Are we kicking out people who don't believe in those things? Are we saying that they're not Americans and then they have to go back? And of course, the answer is we're not, right? And so it just sort of shows that this is perhaps necessary to be a good American, but it isn't sufficient, and that it actually kind of does matter how much you share a historical religion or historical culture, a historical sort of social framework with the.
So another essential book for getting some depth on Jacob Savage's essay, The Lost Generation, is by Stephen Turner. And it's called Liberal Democracy 3.0, Civil Society in an Age of Experts. So he talks about how as a result of the bloody and murderous 30 years war between Protestants and Catholics in Germany in the 17th century, politics in the Western world has increasingly tried to narrow and narrow and narrow the realm of the political, in particular in reaction to World War II. And so more and more of political decision-making has been shifted from the stuff that you can vote on and given to experts. And there are some benefits to that approach, and there are some downsides to that approach. So what Turner does in this book is he talks about the advantages and the disadvantages of rule by experts. Right? When DEI became institutionalized, and DEI led to hiring practices that actively, explicitly, racially discriminated against white men, right? How did this happen without any democratic debate? It happened because we've increasingly reduced the realm of the political, and we've put more and more power in the hands of those who build themselves as neutral experts. So liberal democracy 3.0 means power and decision-making is delegated to more and more unelected commissions and experts and expert bodies and accreditation boards and diversity officers rather than to voters and legislators, right? The hiring mandates and the soft anti-woke quotas that are described by the Jacob Savage essay were not usually passed as federal laws by politicians. They were implemented by various expert bodies. So these bureaucracies possess more and more discretionary power, and they have more and more power outside of the rule of the executive and of the legislative and of the judicial branch. And they are reshaping the labor market and social norms autonomously. You can't sue government bureaucrats usually. So we have less and less democracy, and the lost generation, right, has no political mechanism to challenge these policies through the ballot box, right? We have less and less realm for public debate, and we have more and more fact surrogates, right? We have certain narratives about privilege and historical redress and merit that are given power over factual narratives, right? We've got all these claims by experts that all good people just accept as unquestionable facts, right? Which remove these topics from the realm of political debate. Our elites since World War II have desperately wanted to remove, for example, questions of race, nationalism, and immigration from political debate. For decades in the United States and in Australia and other countries, the major political parties have tacitly accepted we will not campaign and fight over the issue of immigration. So in the case of the lost generation, right, this group was silenced because the premises of their exclusion were the expert truth decided by the leading academics and corporate bureaucracies, right? And to question the fairness of this anti-white hatred and discrimination was to question the expert consensus, which is delegitimated by our major institutions. So we have shifted from public opinion to expert consensus, right? In liberal democracy 2.0, mass public opinion had great weight. In liberal democracy 3.0, we were increasingly ruled by experts who proclaim themselves neutral and disinterested. So liberal democracy 2.0 relied on public discussion, debate, and majoritarian politics. Now, majoritarian politics is regarded as a grave threat to democracy, because when our elites talk about protecting our democracy, what they really mean is protecting their own rule. It is super democratic when you have judges invalidating referenda passed by the people. So the lost generation is a group of liberal democracy 2.0 citizens who believed in universalism and believed in institutions and believed in individual merit. Now they're colliding with the liberal democracy 3.0 institutions that operate on a specialized, expert-derived theory of equity. Right? They're trying to engage in a discussion about fairness in a system designed to bypass discussion in favor of expert administration. Just shut up and do what you're told, peasant. It used to be in the news media and in journalism, being controversial was interesting and sexy and exciting thing. But over the past 20 years, if you are described as controversial by the New York Times, that means you're a bad person. So who enforces this managerial revolution, right? It's increasingly the experts, the bureaucrats, administrative bureaus, managers, right? You have all these tools of the expert managerial class. And it's not just some kind of workplace annoyance. It's a constitutional level and shift in how power is exercised, right? Citizens are now steered by experts, right? People are less and less citizens, and they are more and more sheep. So the lost generation was not the victim of some passing cultural fad. They were the collateral damage of a deep constitutional transformation to minimize the realm of the political, to put more and more power in the hands of experts and bureaucracies. And to question it shows that you are a bad person.
The people who founded and built this country. And again, to me, I think he uses the notion it's not a scalar. Now I'm going to just, my father who's a physicist is going to come shoot me because I think he's using it as scalar being a variable that can have different values and it's not just a yes or no. But I'd say no, actually that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
You could actually be, and I have friends who I'd put in this, particularly like friends from kind of non-traditional minorities, but who grew up in like very traditional American places where they were like surrounded by a bunch of chud white guys when they were growing up. A lot of those guys, culturally, they are super American. Some of them become Christian. That's another thing that they...
Okay, I think we get the point.
They're important. But if you were a white working class man, this most certainly did not start in 2013. When you talk about the destruction of your neighborhood, when you talk about your job being shipped off to a foreign country, these sorts of things started decades ago. And so I think there's a little bit of myopia here in his kind of outlook. And again, he's chosen a victim group that I don't think conservatives should find at least the most compelling victim group. The second problem I had, and I think you were sort of kind of alluding to it in your own comments, is that he doesn't really say what we should do, and he doesn't encourage us to stand up and say, hey, no, this is wrong.
So an essay isn't less of an essay because it doesn't propose a solution, right? Simply describing a problem or describing a group's lived experience, that's powerful enough. So the Washington Post has an article, "Is Gen Z the key to a manufacturing revival? Fall River thinks so." So should we manage our economy on the basis of certain abstract models of economic efficiency, or should we manage our economy to promote the dignity and quality of life for most of our citizens? I side with the latter. So the more we have high-stakes, high-skill engagement with the physical world, right, the better it is for millions of our fellow citizens who have IQs, say, under 115. Right? People with a 95 IQ should be able to do work that provides them with dignity and provides them with the ability to raise a family. So Jacob Savage, in his Lost Generation essay, argues that his generation suffers from a crisis of agency. Well, maybe we need more and more opportunities for our fellow citizens to exercise dominion and agency, such as manufacturing, to create lives of dignity and purpose, right? Maybe the antidote to the Lost Generation narrative is not just jobs in TV writing, but mastery of manufacturing, right? Not just feeding machines, but engaging in artisanal manufacturing, where people can see the tangible results of their labor, right? We crave friction, right? We crave physical output to feel fully human, right? People feel they've got jobs that lack purpose. Maybe we need some kind of hybrid job between the white-collar office and the blue-collar assembly line, right? Maybe we need ways of taking digital literacy and applying it to heavy industrial output, right? Creating manufacturing jobs that are not just sweatshop labor, right? But a creative technical pursuit. I think this is probably the best solution to the virtual abyss of meaningless white-collar work, right? Here's an opportunity to bridge the gap between high-tech and the old world material manufacturing basis, right? This is an antidote to thin, interchangeable identities of global citizens, right? People can form local roots, building communities around manufacturing, right? This can help to revive social fabric, right? Maybe we can shift our tariff policies and economic policies to meet increasingly the needs for dignity and the other psychological needs of our fellow citizens. Right? People shouldn't have to go to university to get a job where they can afford to raise a family.
We're not going to put up with this. If anything, he is, there's a little bit of an intellectual battered spouse syndrome here. You know, he is kind of too scared to say, hey, the people who did this to us, they're bad. They're wrong. These were not people who were otherwise good people who just had the sort of unique blind spot that they were not so nice to white guys. These were really bad people doing bad things, and we need to call them out for doing bad things and take.
So depending on your hero system, the shift to DEI is bad or it's good. And the basis for your hero system will be substantially subjective. So I'm not sure how much benefit there is in saying, oh, your hero system is terrible. But let's think about the Lost Generation in the age of expertise. So Stephen Turner published in 2013 this book, The Politics of Expertise. So we have given the claims of experts more and more power. We accord them truth, and we recognize that they have increasing political authorized currency. The lost generation got the currency of degrees. They developed the habits of mind of compliance, right? The number one thing that education inculcates is being compliant to the system of education. But this currency was devalued. And how did this happen? Right? So we have an order that has failed to deliver the goods for some people, such as the lost generation. The prospects of the lost generation were destroyed by the DEI rule of experts. So liberal democracies have tried to depoliticize difficult issues by handing them over to experts such as economists and planners and social workers. And so this allows the liberal power elite to claim these are just neutral decisions. So the lost generation described by Jacob Savage is trapped because the expert consensus, insulated from democratic political decision-making, has shifted its aims, right? The experts fail to deliver output legitimacy, results, and prosperity, and so that's why the public is now rebelling against the rule of experts. And this essay is a rebellion against the expert consensus that failed this generation. So for decades, Americans have experienced voting does not change their material reality because power increasingly lies in the hands of bureaucrats and experts. The lost generation was removed from employment by the world of bureaucratic politics, right? Decisions are increasingly made by the aggregation of expert opinion, central banks, zoning boards, not by leaders who can be held accountable. So we have a current system that dissolves responsibility. No single person can be blamed for the outcome. Lost generation has no one to petition for redress. We have elite overproduction. We have all these worthless degrees. We have a market in expertise that has changed and shifted against the interests of the lost generation. So now trust has collapsed. Expert authority, which relied on trust and its ability to deliver tangible results, is gone. It's lost. People are mad.
The sorts of political and legal actions that will get them to stop doing those bad things and punish them for bad things that they have done in the past, especially when those things are frankly contrary to American law.
Yeah, I just agree with so much of that. First, when you're talking about just the class that has been singled out and elevated here, you think about the fact that this guy, again, I don't know him, but many people, him and perhaps many people like him, have been pushing the kind of policies that have revolutionized working class neighborhoods, working class job markets. They have been just savaging these people on a regular basis with very little care, constantly, deriding these people. Oh, can't you just learn to code? Can't you just learn to do something else? Can't you just be more competitive, be better, figure it out? This is the
Here's a discussion between the comic Nick Dixon and the academic jolly heretic bloke.
Will peak and are at their best or whatever at different and decide what they want to do at different stages. So it implies that if you're born in 1980,
right, this is Edward Dutton speaking, the academic.
You've got to go for it. You've got to be winning your prize at the Edinburgh Festival of Comedy when you're about 22, 23, such that you're established 7 years later, or you're just screwed. And then you have a generation of people. They argue, as I think we've discussed before, Nick, that, it means that the absolute best white men, the super brilliant white men, may well get through. I'm not even sure that's true, because then those people have to count out of political correctness in a very extreme way and can't joke about certain things and can't and have to be careful, about what they're funny about in comedy. But of course, what it means is that you get all these people that are getting through, all these people that are in comedy on the panel shows or whatever, who are women and who are minorities, who just aren't very good. And then people who are objectively better than them, that in the 90s would have been there making people laugh, are not there. It's insane. And it's the same in academia, which was my background until relatively recently. And it's obviously the same in every other area of life. So you've got this. It's just weird seeing the statistics laid out like that. I don't know. There's something about the numbers, don't you think? That it just hits you. My God, we've been through this this abuse.
Yeah. And so so this is the article we're talking about. In case you don't know, The Lost Generation, Jacob Savage, and some of the numbers you're talking about. He for example, here he talks about in 2011, the year I moved to Los Angeles, white men were 48% of lower level TV writers. In 2024, they accounted for just 11.9%. And then the Atlantic's editorial staff went from 53% male to 89%. No, sorry, went from 53% male and 89% white.
So Meghan McArdle is a centrist, some libertarian and conservative instincts, quite anti-Trump, and thoughtful, uses the polite indoor voice, and she devoted her most recent op-ed to discussion of Jacob Savage's essay, The Lost Generation. So she moves the argument from observation to structural validation, right? She has shifted the venue from this niche heterodox outlet of Compact magazine to a central pillar of the establishment press. So Compact is a magazine explicitly designed for those skeptical of liberalism. It is a magazine designed for the heterodox. So by citing Jacob Savage in the Washington Post, Meghan McArdle validates his data for the ruling center-left elite. So Jacob Savage delivered an outside critique. Right? Meghan McArdle, she uses her inside voice to deliver an inside admission. And she explicitly labels this racial anti-white discrimination as an open secret that everyone in media, academia, and entertainment knew. So she's moving the claim from right-wing conspiracy theory to acknowledged institutional reality. So she then adds a social dimension to explain why the discrimination became so acute so quickly. And she argues that the backlash and the rise of anti-DEI sentiment is driven not just by the discrimination, but by the dishonesty surrounding it. Right? The elites made a Schmittian argument. We must discriminate against you and your race to correct historical wrongs. It is unfair to you personally, but it is necessary. And our elites did not do that, right? They could have made an open, honest argument. Instead, they denied what was happening. They denied the blatant anti-white racial discrimination, and they labeled the young white men complaining about it as mediocre and entitled. So it's this denial, it's this refusal to admit the state of exception that serves as a primary accelerant of cultural resentment. So if you're tracking the intellectual evolution of the dissident right or the Groyper movement, Meghan McArdle's piece is a critical signal. It says that the hiring penalty for white men has finally become an acceptable topic of discussion in polite society. So we have the center, the elite, the Washington Post admitting that this fringe Compact magazine essay is right. It's right about the data. It's right about the political energy that is unleashed by this data. And then Christopher Caldwell, he has a thesis in his book, The Age of Entitlement, that provides the structural framework to understand this intergenerational gaslighting. So Meghan McArdle treats this anti-white policy as overcorrection. Christopher Caldwell would view it as an inevitable mathematical conclusion of the rival civil rights constitution established in the 1960s. So Caldwell argues that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 created a form of moral debt, and to buy social peace and to correct historical wrongs, the state created and gave deference to a second constitution that centered on racial equity or the privileging of certain racial groups at the expense of other racial groups, and it superseded the first constitution that centered on property rights and freedom of association. Now, this debt has been obscured for decades by a booming economy and a large white demographic majority. So boomers could advocate for diversity without paying a price for it. Now, the bill has come due, right? The gaslighting, the lying, right? That has been the older generation's method, right? The older generation refusing to acknowledge that they have passed the payment obligation entirely onto their grandchildren. And so Christopher Caldwell outlines this is not an accident. This is how the adversarial elite culture survives. It finds new pockets of privilege, such as young white men, and liquidates them to maintain the moral solvency of the regime. So we have this civil rights law functioning as a permanent state of exception, where normal rules regarding association and hiring and merit are suspended to achieve specific political outcomes. So Meghan McArdle observes American institutions refuse to admit how actively they were racially discriminating against white men. So Christopher Caldwell points out that this elite adversarial culture against Americans bitterly clinging to their guns and religions relies on fundamental dishonesty. So if the regime admitted we're suspending the rights of young white men to achieve racial balance, it might clarify the friend-enemy distinction and would very well spark the very conflict that the regime tries to manage. So this gaslighting, calling the displaced men mediocre and entitled, is a rhetorical tool to disguise the state of exception as merely the working of a fair market. So in the post-1964 regime, we have certain groups who are encouraged to develop thick, politically potent identities while demanding that the majority, white Americans, Christian Americans, maintain a thin, purely individualist identity. So Megan McArdle's Washington Post op-ed highlights the collision of these forces. The young white men are operating under the thin identity rules, expecting to be judged as individuals, while institutions operate under the thick rules where certain demographics are favored and others are disfavored. So then men are mocked for noticing that the game is rigged, which is the trap of adversarial culture. Right? To notice the thick penalty is to be accused of white identity politics, which is the ultimate taboo. So they must suffer the group penalty in silence, and they must be forced to speak only in the language of individualism.
In 2013 to 36% male and 66% white in 2024. White men fell from 39% of tenure-track positions in the humanities at Harvard in 2014 to 18% in 2023.
So that means it's already overwhelmingly female. It's already overwhelmingly female. Nothing really needs to be done. They've already taken charge. They're already running tenure track programs at Harvard, such that 60% of the people involved are women, basically, or minorities. And then that's not good enough. Then they have to push them down to 18%. And in some humanities subjects, they reported this article, it was as low as 7.9% white male.
Yeah, and this is all pre-2020 when it even took another exponential leap, you could say, with George, when an unfortunate American drug addict had a drug overdose, a criminal and drug addict, which was really sad. So it says, in retrospect, 2014 was the hinge, the year DEI became institutionalized across American life. Of course, we're talking about America, but it's absolutely the same here. I just watched an excellent video from someone today, actually, on this, who said he liked my content, which I didn't know. And he did let me just shout him out. He did a brilliant video on this. I'll find it in a second. It's affected loads of people across the whole West. This was a guy, DEI Ruined My Career, Integral Views, he's called. So believe me, and he's on.
Yeah, I played excerpts of that video for you earlier.
But on your point, Ed, about sort of, would you have stayed in things? I often think about it's just the chance that you wanted. All you're asking for as a straight white man is the opportunity. All you want is a brutal merit-based world where you can just test your mettle. That's all you're asking for. So when you say, it's like playing that cup game, right, that they play in the street in American movies, but there's nothing under any of the cups, then you're insane to keep playing the game. If there was just one thing on the one cup, you think, okay, I could probably work this out, right? But it came to a position in comedy where there's nothing. They're telling you can't have anything. You can't have an agent. You can't have anything explicitly because of your immutable characteristics. So you're a fool to kind of carry on. And even then you carry on for a while thinking, well, maybe something will happen. You know what I mean? But you're just like, well, this is completely pointless. And that's not the only reason I left comedy. It's also just a venal, disgusting cesspit full of uncreative, drone-like scum. But it was one of the reasons. And on your... And by the way, why is it that... Matt Walsh had a really interesting thing I might just share, because he pointed out that when they did this, the knock-on effect was so massive just because the people they put in just weren't as good. I thought maybe we could have a look at this, see what you think to this.
The biggest and most important downstream consequence of this open discrimination against white men is that everything in society gets worse as a result. That is the second order effect that the compact piece doesn't really get into. It's the third rail, the part you're not supposed to talk about. The truth, which everybody intuitively knows, is that things were a lot better back when white men were not being discriminated against by every institution in the country, but instead were running most of them. And the fact of the matter is that a hugely disproportionate number of our greatest leaders, innovators, pioneers, explorers, philosophers, and so on, have been white men. I mean, without white men, we wouldn't have airplanes or spaceships or trains or phones or light bulbs or computers or the internet or batteries or X-ray machines or jet engines or rockets or 1,000 other things that our society depends on to exist and to flourish. We never would have had a railway system or the printing press.
Living in caves.
country, which was founded by white men and led by white men and expanded from coast to coast and settled and built up mostly by white men. Now, these are all facts, historical realities that cannot be denied by reasonable people. It's just true. And while black women are encouraged to be proud of the historical achievements of black women, whatever those might be, and Asians to be proud of Asian achievements and Native Americans of Native American achievements and so on, white men are the one group in the entire face of the planet who've been forbidden to even acknowledge what other white men have accomplished.
All right. Don't watch the whole Matt Walsh show, but it was just an interesting clip. That's quite interesting. It's pretty obviously true, isn't it? There's a good tweet I'll find later about the sort of second and third order effects of this. It's had repercussions throughout society. It said that people had less children. It also meant that women were pushed into roles, and therefore they probably would have raised children and didn't. The number of sort of downstream effects.
But also women being one of the things that's noticeable in academia is that women are sexually select, of course, for status. They sexually select hypergamously from themselves. So they want men that have higher social status than themselves. Now, in humanities, where women are dominant, then there's very, very few men that have higher status than themselves, with the result that there's nobody for them to be sexually attracted to, and so they become cat ladies or lesbians. And so it infertilizes them in that way. So it's just against the evolutionary order of things. Men are.
So in Australia, the ruling Labor Party deliberately chose to throw in with Australia's 800,000 Muslims, because there are only about 100,000 identifying Jews in Australia, and they didn't want to do anything to minimize Muslim protests that called for the genocide against Jews. Now we've got a Bondi massacre, which may force the Labour Party to either change or to possibly lose power. And this old bloke here, Paul Kelly, might be the most esteemed or respected centrist journalist in the Australian press.
Addressed, and that means it's got to be addressed with new laws, new approaches and new norms. The idea that the status quo can simply continue has just been absurd. And that's what we've learnt from this massacre. This massacre tells us the status quo for the last 2 years was a failure. And it's got to go now. Josh Frydenberg is right when he said everything has got to be on the table. Everything has now got to be considered. Whether we're now talking not just about...
So Josh Frydenberg is Jewish. He's the former treasurer. Had one of the most powerful positions in the Conservative ruling coalition before they were thrown out of power a few years ago.
About gun laws, whether we're talking now about racial hatred laws, whether we're talking now about the interaction of the police with the community, whether we're talking now about the role of ASIO.
It was studying how the Bondi police didn't have any long guns. They were just vastly outpowered by the rifles that were used by these two Islamic terrorists on Bondi Beach.
And in particular, the need for a coordinated, resolute response coming from government. All these things have got to be on the table. They've all got to be addressed. The status quo for the last 2 years has failed. This must be obvious to everybody now.
The political consideration that I think has weighed on Anthony Albanese, certainly in the lead up to the May election, was...
So Albanese is Australia's left-of-centre Prime Minister.
There's a huge number of Muslim Australian voters now who care deeply about the Middle East. Maybe they have family connections. He was concerned that I think Labor would be punished, particularly in some Western Sydney electorates, for having been seen to be not critical enough of Israel or not neutral enough.
So Sydney Jews overwhelmingly live on the eastern suburbs by the ocean in very expensive real estate. Sydney's Muslims live much further inland in the western suburbs.
The advice, do you think, to him now, Paul, in the wake of this massacre, does this change the perception of other Australians to give Albanese the cover he needs or the justification he needs to take actions that will probably be very unpopular in those communities?
This is a very difficult position Australia is now in, and that Mr Albanese, as Prime Minister, is now in. There's no getting away from that, because essentially what's got to happen is there's got to be a change of approach, and the government can't be guided anymore by these calculations of pure electoral balance. That's not going to work. That's not going to solve Australia's problem. This problem of anti-Semitism has got to be addressed. Now, that means it's got to be addressed in a whole series of ways. We do need a bipartisan approach coming from both Labor and the coalition, if that's going to be possible. We do need a sense of reason. We've got to be careful of extremes coming from the right and the left, but we do need to consider things such as migrants coming to this country, the reliability of migrants, their commitment to Australian values, that's got to be addressed. Gun laws have got to be addressed. Government support for organisations that practice anti-Semitism has got to be identified and addressed. All these things have got to be on the table. Now, this is going to be very difficult politically. There's no question about that. But the government's got itself in this position. It tried to soft pedal these issues, and perhaps that worked in terms of the scale of its election victory last May. But that has bequeathed this incredible dilemma coming after the Bondi massacre, and there is no escaping this. The Prime Minister now has got to focus on the national interest and social cohesion. And I think that won't be an easy job given the electoral basis of the Labor Party.
So when you praise diversity, you're praising that it's a good thing that we have less and less in common with our fellow citizens.
For a long time, the idea that there's reverse racism against white people was treated as a racist canard. But a new viral article in Compact magazine by writer Jacob Savage found that young white men have vanished from white-collar and creative professions. In 2014, white men were 31% of American medical students. By 2025, they were just 20%. White men dropped from 31% of law school graduates to 25%, from 48% of lower-level TV writers to just 12%. The Atlantic's editorial staff went from 53% male and 89% white to 36% male and 66% white. And white men fell to just 18% of tenure-track positions in the humanities at Harvard. This wasn't by accident, it was by design, DEI design, to overcome what had been admittedly terrible discriminatory practices that kept out women and people of color. White-collar industries simply reversed the discrimination and aimed it at white guys. It's really appalling because all racial discrimination is appalling. Here with us now to discuss is GOP political advisor Mark McKinnon. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. So what did you make of this article?
Well, the data doesn't lie. I'm in the middle of working on a documentary on Gen Z, and it reflects a lot of what I've been seeing over the last couple of years looking into this issue. Clearly, there's been a profound impact culturally, politically, across the board for young men, and we're seeing it in the employment place as well as everywhere else. So what's clear is that young white men have been ignored in the workplace and in colleges and elsewhere,
So you could only have this conversation on the fringes of polite society until the past week, really.
They've been denied opportunity, and that's the real thing that's been going on, is that this is a cohort, a demographic cohort that has just been ignored by society in general, by politics, by culture across the board. And so that's why Donald Trump was so successful, but also Mondami was successful in his election, because they said the most important things. This is what Charlie Kirk did. The three most important words in politics are "I hear you," and this is a group of our electorate that for years had not been listened to and not been paid attention to and been completely ignored. So this is a really interesting finding that certainly supports what we're seeing in our documentary.
Amazing. Tell us some other things that you found in the documentary. What is their emotional reaction to this, and what are young people telling you?
Well, the most profound implication and discovery that we've had is just how much the young men have felt denied by society the opportunity to participate. And what's happening is that as a result of that, they have turned to to social media, to that they're not interacting. And that's what's really profound is that young men and young women, for lots of complicated reasons.
So if you're not allowed to speak honestly about what's going on, and polite society refuses to discuss honestly what's going on, it has an incredible disorienting effect. I've never heard of this woman, Sydney Watson, but she's not thrilled by what's going on in Australia.
Sudanese gangs running around hacking people's limbs off. It did not have Islamic attacks. The worst, really, I think that you could get was a bunch of goofy, idiot kids breaking into people's cars and badly stealing whatever money they could find out of the thing with, what's the thing called in the front? The little thing. What's it called? Glove box. Out of the glove box. I have friends in the police department in Melbourne who have told me in no uncertain terms that particularly when it comes to youth crime, it is not Australian-born children who are committing the vast majority of crime. So do with that what you will. But my Australia, the Australia that I grew up in, the Melbourne that I grew up in, that I was very happily living in until, 5-6 years ago, is gone. And I am so
This Sudanese crime wave in Melbourne is that friends of mine in Melbourne.
Heartbroken about that. I think the issues that we are seeing on repeat now are a symptom of a deeper problem tied to the destruction of Australian culture, to diluting Australian culture with everybody else's culture, inviting people into our country who hate us and hate our way of life, and the tolerance of all of this. And I want to be very clear about this. If you come to my country and we let you into my country, you should be a model bloody citizen. Your intention should be to be the best Australian that you can be. You wear our flag, you abide by our laws, you consume our traditions and they become your traditions, and you make my country better. You don't come to my country.
Right, these are very reasonable requests, demands.
And shoot people up on the frickin' beach on a nice afternoon when they're just going about living their lives. I'm sorry if some of this is disjointed. I actually find it quite hard to articulate my viewpoints here because the primary feeling that I have is just rage. But, I feel like I'm watching the slow choking death of my country, and...
Well, good on.
I do think there are...
That woman, right? Some pretty sharp critiques.
Scores or SAT scores. We know that preferential treatment has been given to specifically Black students over Asian students. That's the widest disparity, right? The focus is often on white students, but we like to forget that the primary victims of affirmative action have been Asian American students. To a lesser extent, there has been a feminization of the rules. And this is where I agree with Helen, and I think for a very different reason, right?
Helen refers to Helen Andrews.
Helen Andrews and I are I think there's not a huge sliver in the Venn diagram of where we agree with each other when it comes to policy issues. I would consider myself a feminist. I think, especially from an economic perspective, it is good for women to participate in the workplace, because if you're taking out half the population as an input, that is bad for an economy, right? You're putting an artificial ceiling on your economic output. That being said, Helen is saying that the rules should be fair, and I agree, because I think women are capable of achieving everything that men can when the rules are completely equal. Okay, in what ways have the rules been changed? So I found this study from FIRE organization, the Free Speech Advocacy Organization. And one of the things they were trying to figure out is how much of the intolerance for campus free speech is different between the political parties or political persuasions versus specifically gender, because we know that women tend to be more liberal than men. Last night.
And this is Amanda Claypool. She's on the right.
They constantly yearn for a revolution, and I don't think the average person wants that. So he says here, he references that quote I made in the beginning.
And she's analyzing a New York Times column by Ross Douthat.
Most of the men I interviewed start out as liberal, savage rights. Some still are. And he says, Ross says, I would assume.
So Ross Douthat says, you want to de-radicalize young men, stop racially discriminating against them. Seems like a modest proposal.
assume so because disappointed novelists and unsuccessful screenwriters and would-be academics are not natural Trump constituencies. Again, I want to call out the language here. He says disappointed novelists and unsuccessful writers. This is nothing about disappointment and failure. Like, that's definitely a part of it, and it hurts. But what this feels like is betrayal and resentment. Like, you were told something about the world and belief in meritocracy and hard work, and you were deliberately excluded from opportunities despite your hard work. And now you are facing material consequences of that. So you did not get the jobs or the promotion that you were supposed to get. You're not getting the opportunity to start a family or buy a home or start your own business or whatever. Like there's actual material, financial, psychological harm here. So no, these people aren't disappointed and unsuccessful. They're angry. They're resentful. They're bitter. And that's very different because people will behave differently if they're disappointed versus if they're resentful. Over the very important nuance there. Okay, it says the white guys who don't get jobs in the culture industry or who lose out in applications to professional schools displace other white men competing in less prestigious, more Republican-coded industries, instilling resentment there as well. So the idea here is that if these guys aren't getting the jobs that they're supposed to be getting, and what I would implicitly assume here are the Democrat-coded industries, so in the media and academia and whatever, that they're just going to Republican-coded industries, which, what are those? It's so stupid to frame things as Democrat-coded and Republican-coded. But the assumption here is, okay, so they're going to less prestigious, more Republican-coded industries, and they're instilling resentment there. So they're taking their angst because of what they didn't get, because they weren't allowed in to what I'm going to consider as the Democrat-coded industries. And so they're going to these other industries that are more Republican-leaning. And so they're fueling they're channeling their resentment and their anger there, which I think this is completely sophomoric to frame industries as Republican versus Democrat. That's just so stupid. Okay, so he says, at the same time, certain schools and jobs and industries, especially tech, especially crypto, became hubs for men displaced from other sectors and thus natural hotbeds of reaction. And everyone ends up a little bit more radicalized, a little bit more open to extreme appeals. So he's arguing here that the guys who've gone their own way and they're trying to do their own thing, so building startups, investing in crypto, whatever, that these guys are black pill doomerists who are becoming incredibly radicalized. And again, I would like to see the evidence for this radicalization, because I'm any rational person. I think I'm seeing the opposite happen. So if you just want to look at political violence as an example, how many of these radicalized conservative white men have shot up schools, have assassinated people, have committed acts of political violence in the last year? Now, about what has been happening, I think, for millennials, I think we internalized it. I think we were quiet. We didn't quite know what to make of what was happening. And I think we had expectations of things that were supposed to go our way, and they didn't. And we internalized it and said, okay, well, this is my fault. I did it wrong. Right. Because for the longest time you had, those above us being like, well, you're just lazy. You're soft. You're weak. You're a snowflake. Right. And now with Gen Z coming up behind, they're finally calling the kettle black. You have folks like Nick Fuentes who are like, nah, I'm done. Okay, call me a racist all you want. I'm done. I'm not going to do this. And you have Gen Z who's finally kind of put a nip in the bud and said, okay, we're not doing this. This is clearly screwed up. I think millennials now are having an opportunity, a come to Jesus moment almost. It's yeah, okay, we definitely got screwed over, right? This is not what we signed up for either. And so I think a lot of people are feeling quite betrayed by everything. So, he concludes this by, talking about his own experiences. And he says, at the time I blamed women, of course. He said they've since ascended the TV ladder and work as co-executive producers on major shows. On some level, even today, I can't help but think that could have been me. That should have been me. But he also says those women didn't take our jobs any more than the 50-year-old Hollywood lifers had. The lifers were still there. They're still there. And I'm not angry at the women and people of color who made it instead of me. People have the right, in most cases, the responsibility to take the opportunities that are offered to them. Or even at the older white guys who ensured that I didn't. Mostly I'm annoyed at myself because instead of settling down, proposing to my then girlfriend, now wife, and earning a steady income that might support a family, I spent a decade insisting the world treat me fairly, when the world was loudly telling me it had no intention of doing so. I could see what was happening. I was being told point blank what was happening. And still, I thought I'd be the exception. That if I wrote one more script, took one more meeting, I'd slip through. But very few people get to be the exception. And this is something that is so heartbreaking, but so relatable, because I think this has been the message we have all been told. It's like, okay, just keep working harder. Just the next video will make you viral. The next, meeting you have, that will be the one that changes everything. And I think we were taught to believe in exceptionalism, and that if we just kept trying and kept going, that things would work out. And eventually you get to a point where you have to grow up, and you're like, okay, maybe I was wrong. Like, maybe this isn't actually working out in my favor. And he says here, like, it told him.
So Chris Rufo, probably the most effective Republican activist of the past 5 years, perhaps along with Charlie Kirk. He's been doing a podcast with Steve Sadler's publisher, Lomez, a.k.a. Jonathan Kieperman, and they devoted their latest
This week on Rufo and Lomez, we'll be discussing a bombshell essay in Compact Magazine.
Is there something about the political moment that we can finally have this conversation?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all those things. And your historical point is certainly true. This dates back to the mid-1960s, in fact. You had Lyndon Johnson's affirmative action executive order in 1965. Right. You had the basis of disparate impact theory really starting to trickle upwards from the legal academy in the 1970s. In the 1990s, there were two books by a Claremont University professor named Frederick Lynch, great guy, called The Invisible Victim and the Diversity Machine. And he was already cataloging and doing deep reporting on this phenomenon where white men in corporate environments were being, systematically disadvantaged in hiring. And it wasn't just anecdote or speculation. He actually brought the goods. And then, of course, it accelerated between 2014 and 2024, the period of the Great Awakening. And so the question is, why now is it suddenly okay to talk about, where even now left liberals, employees at the Washington Post and the New York Times and the other publications, they're now expressing shock. Oh my gosh, I read The Lost Generation in Compact Magazine. I had no idea this was happening. This is an outrage. This is awful. We should not be doing this. And my first reaction is frankly anger, because it's like, wait a minute.
Do you believe
this
them?
argument? No, of course not.
Yeah.
Of course I don't believe them, because they're lying. It's now okay for them to peek their heads out and start to acknowledge the reality. But I think this is like the Berlin Wall moment, right? In the Eastern Bloc, so east of the Berlin Wall, in the Soviet Union, everybody knew about the various forms of corruption that had plagued the USSR. They would make jokes about it. They would talk about it behind the scenes. I remember one Hungarian professor who had taught, during the Soviet period said, when I was in class, we would teach Soviet doctrine. Then after class, I would invite the students into my home, and we built a little bit of trust. And then I would teach them the truth about what was happening. And I think we had the same phenomenon during the woke era, where all of these people were in total denial about the very obvious things that were happening. I was at the tip of the spear reporting on DEI and all of this discrimination, surfacing documents. And I was attacked viciously for years. This reporting is racist. This reporting is not true. This reporting is misleading. This reporting is totally inconvenient. And so for me, of course, personally, there's a sense of vindication. Obviously, what we were saying was completely true, completely moral, and completely right, justified the whole time. But then the other part of me is pragmatic and says, all right, well, let's actually have the conversation. Let's have the reckoning that is long overdue. And it seems like we're there. It seems like the fever of woke has broken. The wall has come down, if we want to use the other metaphor. Yeah. And now people are feeling like they can safely, with little career risk, start to address the truth of what's been happening.
Okay.
Well, let's try to make the other side of the argument. And again, this is speculating. I'm not sure I even agree with it. But the other side of the argument is there really is no necessity that kind of crushed talent will find another avenue. And look at the history of the Soviet Union. It's not the case. I think the Soviet Union crushed its talent for so many decades, and much of it was wasted. Of course, the Russians have produced great art, great literature, great nonfiction. The samizdat culture, within the Soviet Union more broadly, produced good works. But I think the counterfactual is, would it have been better under another system? And the answer is probably yes. And I think even the idea that, okay, crypto, speed running Super Mario Brothers, whatever, like that actually doesn't make your case better. It actually is like, wait a minute.
All right. No, you're right.
Are the potential like great novelists and academics now just getting really good at Super Mario Brothers on the Nintendo?
No, we have podcasts, Chris. Okay, we have podcasts.
We have podcasts, yeah, and so yeah, okay.
And this is
controversial suicide law in New York.
The National Conservatism podcast. What do we got here?
They were white men, and under the impetus of DEI and wanting to hire diversity, essentially became just lost out on incredibly important career opportunities. The author starts with himself and then quotes many other men in the same position over the last 20 years. And that piece went mega viral. I hope did my small part in making that happen. I'm sure many of us did on Twitter. That piece went mega viral. It's been addressed by multiple White House officials at this point. The vice president has tweeted about it. So that piece is really, and then of course the mainstream media, quote unquote, is gearing up to try to answer that with a series of pieces. But they are answering. That's the point. That it has truly entered the mainstream. This is nothing new. Nothing in that piece was new to any of the things that, the four of us have been saying for quite some time on this show. Jeremy Carl, who likes to sub in for one of us when we're out sometimes, has been on this show. He wrote a great book about this. Was it last year or the year before, 2023 or 2024, called The Unprotected Class, about discrimination against white males, primarily whites, but I think specifically in this case, white males. Women often were able to sidestep this. At least they count for one diversity metric, right? I'm sure Amber and I have seen this in action. But this is just hiding in plain sight. These the things that people would openly admit to doing, and the discrimination that offices and managers were openly doing and admitting to doing for the last 20 years, culminating, of course, in 2020 and in a racial hysteria, are shockingly illegal. They are and always have been illegal. It has never been legal to hire, fire, promote, demote on the basis of race, even in part. So unlike in admissions in college, this part of the Civil Rights Act does not even allow for a thumb on the scale, which was allowed in admissions only as like sort of special exemption by the Supreme Court until Students for Fair Admissions 3 years ago. That was never the case under Title VII. That was never the case in the workplace. And yet it was rampant and it was encouraged by the federal government. And I'll get to that in a minute, but it was rampant. It was encouraged. It was done openly. I have myself a lot of friends who have told me stories in the past few years. I have a friend who was told very directly, we're dropping you from this project because you're a white guy and we need more diversity. I mean, like just very, very direct discrimination. The piece makes one, I think, not new point, but something that he really tied up for me, Jacob Savage, in a way that I hadn't thought of before, which is that the vast majority of the brunt of that discrimination fell on millennials and Gen Z, because boomers and to some extent Gen X, who straddled this line, they were already high up enough in the company. And of course, they weren't going anywhere. White males in the C-suite weren't giving up their jobs. What they were doing was very, very heavily practicing affirmative action for anyone new and young who was coming up. So if you're hiring a new VP, right, it wasn't going to be a millennial male, white male. It was going to be a diversity of some type, right? Those white male slots, as it were already taken up by their boomer management. And so it was practiced even doubly or more heavily to make sure that the rest of the young up-and-comers were all as diverse, quote unquote, as possible. So I think this is a turning point. I think we've certainly come a long way on this subject in the last few years. I know I testified on it just a couple years ago before Congress, and it was considered extremely controversial when we did that. You had to be like a Nazi or a white nationalist to care about discrimination against white people. That seems like that fever has broken, and this is now a mainstream topic of conversation. I think that's all to the good. I don't think the piece is perfect. Jeremy Carl has some critiques of it on his Substack I think are worthwhile. But I think this is an important moment. And I would like to correspondingly say the Trump administration is doing an amazing job on this. And I know, and here I may be like, I don't want to sound like I'm downplaying this. I obviously care about this subject a lot and have worked on it for a long time. But these lawsuits take time, and you cannot expect the wheels of justice to turn that quickly. But the people that the Trump administration has in place on these subjects are both fantastic. The two people I would just highlight are Harmeet Dillon over at the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ, who is, by the way, she lost 75% of her staff because she is going to enforce the law on behalf of white males who were discriminated against. 75% of those DOJ lawyers have quit. I mean, good riddance, don't let the door hit you, but she needs help. If you are interested in this kind of work, she's openly advertising. They have a shortened staff for everything that the Civil Rights Office is supposed to do, but they are doing a fantastic job. Just this week or late last week, they announced that they are dropping disparate impact analysis formally. That is the analysis that was used by previous administrations to encourage companies and universities to engage in this kind of discrimination, because it presumptively looked at any disparity and said that is evidence of discrimination. If you have fewer Blacks working for you than their percentage of the population, that is a presumptive discrimination. And Gail Harriet has a great law review article called How Disparate Impact Analysis Made Everything Presumptively Illegal. But yeah, that created a legal environment in which companies were very, very afraid not to practice this kind of discrimination, which itself is illegal. But the Trump administration also has Andrea Lucas over at EEOC. She's calling on anybody who experienced this kind of discrimination in recent years to step forward to open an EEOC case. There are already cases working their way through the system. So yeah, I know that was all long, but I really think we've turned a corner this week on that kind of invidious discrimination. And the Trump administration has very, very good people working on this. This is not an amateur hour. They have people who are both ideologically committed to justice under the law and to equal protection for everybody, not just for favored classes of the left. And they are competent and they are ruthless and they are good. So just, if you have this kind of story, I encourage you to talk to the EEOC, to submit a report and start a case, opening a case to the EEOC. But yeah, I think we turned a corner this week. I don't know what you guys think. Do you think this is the week that America actually starts talking about the real systemic discrimination that was happening as opposed to imaginary one?
Yeah, I was just doing a hit on Timcast about this, and the host, Tate Brown, made a good point, which is that this is a permission piece for people who are a little, skeptical of conservative activists and commentators, and maybe are a bit more normie. They can read this seemingly mainstream article and feel comfortable actually talking about this issue. And that's important in and of itself. And just to echo what you've said about the Trump administration, the EEOC video promising these lawsuits was an absolute banger. The removal of disparate impact liability. I know I've talked on this show like a million times about the Biden era lawsuit against Sheetz, but I'll just bring it up again because it's like a hobby horse of mine. But they went after Sheetz which is a family-owned gas station and convenience store, mostly based in the Mid-Atlantic. But they went after them because they didn't hire certain criminals. And they said, well, because Black people are more likely to have committed a crime or to have been held liable for a crime, this is a disparate impact. Your policy is causing you to hire fewer Black people, so we're going to sue you. And the Trump administration dropped that case this past summer with their initial move, which was an executive order from Trump diminishing disparate impact liability. So it's really great progress that we're seeing. I am concerned about what happens, post-Trump, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but there's always the possibility that this just comes raging right back. And having talked to people who work in the financial industry, the wokeness is still there. It's just kind of bubbling under the surface and perhaps a little more subtle now. And so there's always that possibility that when the culture shifts back the other direction or the politics change, that it's just going to rear its ugly head again. And so it really has to be completely eradicated and made very clear what will happen to people who perpetrate this now while we have power. And then one final point is like, maybe I should go to the EEOC, because I remember when I worked for Cumulus, this media company, their employee database had an offer of like a $2,000 bonus if you recommended someone to the hiring process that increased the diversity of the company or had a diverse background, and that person ultimately got hired. And I had reached out to America First Legal at the time, but didn't hear anything back. So if they're still doing it, it would be perfect.
That's wildly illegal.
I know. When I read it, I was shocked.
You cannot give disparate bonuses based on race.
Right. Yeah. And I have a screenshot of it somewhere, but I think it might be on an old dead computer, which is a great reminder to always back up your hard drive.
Yeah, so just echoing those comments, I think that what the administration has laid out, and it's in a series of executive orders, it's in probes. Also relatedly worth noting, the Solicitor General's office has said that it's not going to recognize as legal and potentially as recognized as unconstitutional preferences that are given to people who are assumed to be socially disadvantaged, with a rebuttable presumption of being socially disadvantaged if you're a minority. That is a standard that is used to allow people to get basically preferential treatment in terms of contracts with the federal government under programs that are responsible for doling out billions of dollars in contracts. That's another area that the administration is focused on. These are all to the good when it comes to doing what John Roberts wrote, what Chief Justice Roberts wrote in his majority opinion in SFFA v. Harvard, where he said eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. The thing is, that ruling just dealt with affirmative action in colleges. So how do you deal with the rest of the public and private sector? And I think it's clear that the Trump administration is doing everything it can do, and rightly so, and that will no doubt cause serious changes, or at least a reconsideration of policies that go way beyond those interacting directly with the federal government. But I do think that the question is outstanding. To Amber's point, what happens when you have a future administration that reverses the executive action that this administration has taken? And then two, what about on the outside? What about in the private sector? The DEI industrial complex has not dismantled itself. It hasn't been dismantled. And so are we going to need a slew of analogous Supreme Court rulings, essentially, to ensure that affirmative action and all of its analogs are struck down everywhere, knowing, of course, that even within the four corners of that decision, the justices themselves anticipated that the colleges would try to use workarounds, and some of the colleges have tried to use workarounds already. So this remains a deeply seated, deeply rooted cultural problem as well. But no doubt the administration appears to be doing everything it can possibly be doing. I would also ask, where's Congress on this?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add here. I mean, obviously, it's really good to see how much the administration is doing on this front to really fight it. And I think that the framing of it as a permission piece, where it's like people suddenly have permission to recognize something that was obvious. I know I can point to instances where I was obviously racially discriminated against over the course of my legal career, especially in law school. Georgetown was terrible about this. They were aggressively trying to minimize the number of white people on law review. That was part of their policy. And so they were structuring it to create a huge section of the law review was available for diversity. It was trying to minimize the importance of grades, things like that. So I'm happy to see this all die. It deserves to die. And I think one thing I will say is DOJ civil rights needs people. They need to join them. They're recruiting because they've lost like 75% of their staff because those staff were super liberal. So if you're listening to this and you are all interested in litigating on behalf of the federal government for a righteous cause, go talk to civil rights. They're hiring.
And with that, we're going to turn to Ben to talk about some revelations about the Mar-a-Lago raid.
No, let's talk about the National Football League. Is it a meritocracy? Surely
we are
it's
seeing
meritocracy.
a quarterback collapse in the National Football League. It's across the board. It's not just Tua getting benched, but quarterback play across the board in the National Football League is collapsing. Let me give you a stat. In 2018, what is that, 7, 8 years ago. 19 quarterbacks averaged more than 250 passing yards. What are we watching?
DEI.
What is going on with the National Football League? Has gambling and fantasy football distracted us so much and covered up all the flaws of the National Football League that we're sitting here watching? We're watching quarterback play go directly into the toilet, and we're pretending like we don't see it at all. My contention is, and we'll unpack this today, and I'll have a conversation with Steve Kim and TJ Moe about it. My contention is the hyper-focus on DEI and black quarterback play has diminished merit, has diminished competition, has undermined the pursuit of excellence for the pursuit of quotas. And everybody's play has dropped because of the hyper-focus on DEI. DEI degrades everything in sight, including the National Football League. Let's go back to 2018, because what we're in is in the middle of the George Floyd sports era. In 2018, I believe, there were 3 black quarterbacks that were throwing for more than 250 yards. And I believe there were only 6 black quarterbacks that started 8 or more games. Now we're in this time in 2025 where there are 14 black quarterbacks who have started 8 or more games. And only 2 black quarterbacks are averaging more than 250 yards per game. So we've increased the number of black quarterbacks playing, but we've decreased the number of black quarterbacks playing at a high level. Once you quit pursuing excellence, everybody gets hurt, even the black quarterbacks. DEI isn't elevating the play of black quarterbacks. It's actually diminishing the play of all quarterbacks.
Jason Whitlock often says dissident things. Interesting.
I want to start by showing you the quarterbacks and the teams with the best record in the National Football League. These are all the teams that have won 10 or more games at this point into the NFL season. This is 14 games into the season. There's 3 weeks left. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teams that have a record of 10-4 or better. Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos at 12-2 with an 81-point differential. If there's a tie-in record, we let point differential serve as the tiebreaker. Sam Darnold, who's playing tonight in Seattle against the LA Rams. Seahawks 11-3, a plus 163 point differential. They're playing the Los Angeles Rams. Matthew Stafford 11-3, a plus 159 point differential. Drake May, New England Patriots 11-3, plus 106 point differential. Josh Allen, Buffalo Bills 10-4, plus 87. Trevor Lawrence, Jacksonville Jaguars 10-4, plus 84. Brock Purdy / Mac Jones, San Francisco 49ers 10-4, plus 51. Justin Herbert, Los Angeles Chargers 10-4, plus 31. Caleb Williams, Chicago Bears 10-4, plus 27. 8 of the top 9 teams in this league have white quarterbacks.
And Potty Bots throws down $10 super chat. Luke covering the NFL and right-wing politics. What could be a greater combo on a Sunday morning?
8 of the top 9. The season's not over. We don't know who's going to win the Super Bowl. Jordan Love could win the Super Bowl. Jordan Love, half white. well, what about Lamar Jackson? You can't count them out. They're 7-7. Who knows what's going to go on? You really think Lamar Jackson and Baltimore this season are going to win the Super Bowl? It's not about who's going to win the Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts, aren't they 9-5? They could win the Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts, two-parent family, traditional type quarterback, but has some issues. Again, he's not well respected even on his own team. But this argument isn't about who can win the Super Bowl. Because the Super Bowl, some of that is luck. It's a one-and-done tournament. You can pull some upsets. You can get into the Super Bowl. This is about building an organization and a franchise that can win consistently and win at a level that keeps that head coach safe. That's every head coach's dream. They all want to be where Mike Tomlin has been for the past. Is Tomlin been with the Steelers now for 19 years? That's where they all want to be for nearly 2 decades. They want that kind of stability. They want to be able to say, hey, man, we didn't have a losing record for 20 straight years. That's how you keep your job the way Mike Tomlin has kept his job. Winning 10, 11, 12, 13 games a year. That stability and consistency. And the argument that I'm making, this isn't a racial conversation. This is a conversation about culture and what type of values and what type of attitude are you bringing to a team? Are you bringing a patriarchal mindset to a team? Are you bringing a mindset of submission to a team and a coach and an organization? Or are you bringing a culture and a mindset of rebellion to an organization? It is hard to win or to do anything consistently when your mindset, your attitude, your mentality, your approach to life is to be in constant rebellion. If your brand is rebellion, if your brand is I submit to no one, I'm a rebel without a cause, if that's your brand, that you're a rebel without a cause, you can't build consistent winning around that brand. Who represents that better than anybody? It's Shedeur Sanders and his daddy. And all the conversation about Shedeur and how Kevin Stefanski hates Shedeur and Kevin Stefanski is trying to undermine Shedeur. And there's virtually no conversation about, is Shedeur willing to submit to Kevin Stefanski? Is he willing to go all in with the team? The reason why I talk about this stuff intimately is because when I started my college football career, and I hate to bring my mediocre, mid-major college football career into this, but it's just true. It shapes my worldview. I brought an attitude of rebellion and non-submission to the Ball State football program. And it didn't matter how talented I was or if I was better than some of the guys playing in front of me, the coaches, justifiably, I didn't realize this in real time, but justifiably, we're sitting there like, man, Whitlock's attitude of rebellion and his charismatic personality, well, that's a problem. And I played offensive line. If I had played quarterback, they would have really wanted nothing to do with me. But it's like, man, Whitlock is funny. He's smart. He's got this locker room lawyer, and he knows how to lawyer up some things. And so the coaches hated me and tried to do everything in their power for all 4 years, but particularly the first 2 years, just tried to beat the rebellion out of me. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized, like, oh, man, if I had just embraced and submitted, man, I would have had a remarkable college football career.
Right. There's a time and a place to submit. I was such a rebel. I just had to work for myself for many years. but learning to submit appropriately to hierarchy and to authority often makes life much more productive, a lot happier, and a lot easier, right? Time and a place for everything, including rebellion and submission. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.